The Byzantine Empire of Greece. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 26 Coronation and Economic Planning. On January 12, 1833, Otto was crowned king of Greece in the newly renovated palace. Thanks to Otto's previous careful planning, the ceremony was quite grand, with a distinguished guest list. The foreign ministers of Britain and France, the regent of Austria, and the crown prince of Russia all personally attended the ceremony, demonstrating their support for Otto, and the kingdom of Greece entered a new chapter. During the ceremony, the Greek people spontaneously gathered in the square in front of the palace. Although the hastily renovated palace was far from luxurious, even appearing somewhat shabby, they still cheered heartily when Otto appeared before the public. Otto's prestige among the Greeks was still quite high, and he had originally planned to arrange for someone to promote him. However, before his entourage could even begin, the Greeks who had accompanied him back from Bavaria spontaneously began to promote Otto. The London Treaty, his strong advocacy against Britain, France, and Russia, his recapture of Thessalonians for Greece, his concern for the people's development, his abolition of the poll tax to reduce her burden, and his voluntary reduction of the royal annuity, all these demonstrate that he is a truly caring king. Furthermore, his impending conversion to Orthodox Christianity, sharing our faith and standing with the Greek people, has significantly boosted Greeks' sense of identity and happiness. Otto has been elevated from a stranger to our greatest king, and the negative influence of the National Assembly, which he brought upon his arrival in Greece, has long since vanished. Of course, Otto also knew that public opinion had an expiration date. The key was that the country's development should benefit the people, whether in terms of improved living standards or a stronger sense of national pride. After the ceremony, Otto summoned the cabinet ministers, Bishop Eugene, and Chief Steward West to finalize Greece's development plan. 3 months have passed now, and I believe everyone has a good understanding of the situation in Greece. Greece is a small country, and it won't be easy for it to grow and prosper. Now I need everyone's concerted efforts. Your Majesty, it is our honor to serve you, everyone shouted in unison. Otto was pleased with the crowd's reaction and smiled, saying, Greece is currently lacking in almost everything, so everyone's efforts are even more necessary. What plans does the cabinet have? Greece is poor in natural resources, even lacking sufficient arable land. At His Majesty Otto's request, we must implement a planned economy, concentrating the nation's resources and avoiding unnecessary waste. To this end, we have formulated a development plan, with 5 main aspects. Prime Minister Sanos gestured to the thick plan document that had been distributed to everyone before the meeting. The first priority is to develop agriculture, cooperating with domestic agricultural companies to vigorously promote advanced agricultural production technologies and use scientific planning and management to develop food and grape cultivation within Greece. Within 5 years, the goal is to meet 70% of domestic food demand while exporting wine and raisins to increase farmers' income. The second priority is a transportation plan, primarily focused on railway and highway construction. Within 5 years, 800 kilometers of railway and 3,000 kilometers of standard highways will be built nationwide. The third article concerns industry, encouraging its development and providing support to key industries such as steel mills, machine shops, and military factories invested in Greece. Taxes and import duties on raw materials for these factories will be waived, and domestic products will be prioritized under the same conditions. The fourth article concerns light industry, primarily textiles, encouraging businesses to invest in textile mills and cooperating with countries such as Egypt, the United States, Russia, the Ottoman Empire, and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies to import cotton or export textiles, ensuring the availability of raw materials and sales channels. The fifth article concerns education, divided into 3 points. 1. Establishing literacy classes in factories, farms, and the military, with the government and churches arranging for regular annual instruction. The primary focus is on teaching commonly used characters and providing legal education related to people's livelihoods to the public, while the military focuses on disseminating military law and some military knowledge too. Establish a public comprehensive university and 3 teacher training colleges in Athens to lay the foundation for further expansion of compulsory education. 3. Establish a military academy, hiring outstanding Army and Navy instructors to train officers and literate soldiers who have performed well in literacy classes. All participating officers and soldiers will be assessed, passing will be rewarded, while failing will result in punishment. These 5 points form the overall framework of the development plan formulated by the cabinet, and are also the core of the government's work for the next 5 years. It can be called the 5th five-year plan. Everyone, please take a look at the plan first. Feel free to raise any questions, Otto said with a smile. Most of the people present were already familiar with this plan, as it was proposed by Otto and formulated by Prime Minister Sanos along with key cabinet ministers. However, everyone clearly lacked confidence in the plan's feasibility. Finally, the finance minister couldn't help but say, "Your Majesty, this plan clearly violates the laws of economic development. I know you all have some concerns. This is the first time a government-led strategy for domestic economic development has been implemented, completely different from the currently popular free market economic theory. But in my view, those so-called market laws may have some merit, but the bullshit theory of completely handing everything over to market regulation is actually a deception concocted by capitalists to make more money. All of you here are the controllers of the nation, the elite of this era. Just thinking about it, it's obvious that the biggest beneficiaries of completely handing the economy over to market regulation are the capitalists. They've concocted a theory to convince those in power not to interfere in the free market, but in reality, it's all about controlling every aspect of economic activity and reaping excessive profits. If we truly accept the idea of the state not interfering in the market economy as gospel, we'd be fools." Otto's words caused the surrounding cabinet ministers to exchange strange glances. Wasn't this what all European countries were doing? Were all those in power fools? From their eyes, Otto knew what they were thinking. Those who could maintain a stable grip on power were rarely fools. Most of them were better at political maneuvering than economics, some had been bought off by capitalists, and some were even major capitalists themselves. Without delving deeper into the details, Otto simply explained, "This plan is based on the data we've collected, such as building 800 kilometers of railway within 5 years to improve transportation in Greece. Railway experts, after analyzing the specifics of the routes we plan to build, have provided preliminary plans that could be completed within 4 years. The 5-year timeframe is to account for Greece's lack of experience in railway construction. Unforeseen problems may arise during the actual work. Therefore, we've included some leeway in each stage of the plan. As long as everyone follows the plan, this 5-year plan will definitely be completed. As for the difficulties we will face, we can discuss them one by one, and everyone can cooperate to solve the problems." Chapter 27 No Money. Now that they were about to discuss specific issues, everyone wisely set aside Otto's earlier remarks about fools and began discussing how to implement a 5-year plan. The 5 plan objectives were discussed one by one. The first, agricultural development, seemed like a no-brainer to Vester, Otto's chief steward who helped manage the lands. The various difficulties raised by the Minister of Agriculture were resolved one by one without Otto needing to do anything. Previously, the agricultural company's collective farms had already spread throughout Greece, controlling over 90% of the country's agricultural land. While Greek land is indeed relatively infertile, the agricultural company possesses advanced breeding, fertilization, and cultivation techniques. Compared to the primitive and inefficient land use in Greece, achieving the government's planned targets is not difficult at all. West even believes that the agricultural company alone could easily exceed the targets. In fact, Otto also has corresponding development plans for the royal family's businesses, many of which align with the current government's 5-year plan. What gives West a headache is the fishing company. Recruiting fishermen for fishing is manageable, but aquaculture is much more troublesome. It would require hiring specialized personnel with relevant knowledge and conducting continuous experiments to determine the best breeding methods. Fortunately, Vester had done similar work before and was quite experienced. The real challenge of the 5-year plan lay in road construction. The current road conditions in Greece were truly appalling. Most of Greece is mountainous and hilly, with narrow, difficult, and dilapidated roads. The only advantage was Greece's long coastline, allowing coastal cities to rely on sea transport. However, connecting the coastal areas with the inland regions required a large number of roads. In addition to widening and reinforcing highways, the recently developed railways offered significant advantages in transporting large quantities of goods. Therefore, Otto commissioned the development of road and rail plans. Road construction mainly requires a large amount of financial investment, which the government's current revenue simply cannot afford, the Minister of Transport said in a deep voice, looking at the Minister of Finance. Because various exorbitant taxes have been abolished, the Greek government's main revenue now relies on agricultural taxes and tariffs. According to our estimates, after covering necessary government expenditures and loan repayments, the remaining funds are planned to be primarily invested in education. If it weren't for Bishop Eugene's promise to send missionaries from various regions to serve as teachers, and the fact that subsidies for basic education are provided by agricultural and fishing companies, we probably wouldn't even have been able to raise the funds needed for education reform. I remember the government still has a surplus of funds, those rebels are wealthy, and there's also revenue from minting tax on the new currency. This funding has already been allocated. The government plans to move the capital from Nafplio to Athens, and before that, Athens needs to be rebuilt. This surplus funding is the initial capital for the reconstruction plan, and the government anticipates that most of the increased fiscal revenue over the next 5 years will be invested in the reconstruction plan. The finance minister replied. The government has long had plans to move the capital to the more suitable Athens. This proposal was approved by Otto and received the support of the vast majority of the public. However, Athens has not recovered from the ravages of the War of Independence, and the government intends to rebuild Athens according to a modern city plan, which would require a large sum of money. The finance minister stated that they genuinely do not have the funds. Everyone looked at Prime Minister Sanos, who nodded, and a silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to Otto. The government had truly exhausted all its resources to support the education program and rebuild Athens, even resorting to other means. They simply couldn't raise any more funds. No money, no money. The railway plan can be put out to investors. We'll provide the specifications and requirements, contract out these sections of the railway, and let businessmen invest. The government can promise a certain period of exclusive rights and tax breaks, Otto said, revealing his plan. Roads are basically not profitable, so I doubt any businessmen will be willing to invest. We'll need government funding. As for the necessary funds, the government can issue the batch of construction bonds to raise funds domestically, and the royal family will take the lead in purchasing a portion. Thank you, Your Majesty. All the Greek people will be grateful for your generosity, Prime Minister Thanos said, knowing Otto was wealthy and already harboring the idea of begging for donations. Now that Otto had brought it up, he immediately smiled. Seeing his expression, Otto shook his head inwardly, then continued, "Don't expect the royal family to foot the bill entirely. They don't have that much money. We should encourage people with spare cash to buy bonds, after all, we're paying interest. Besides, highway construction can be contracted out to businesses. The government can specify the length, width, and hardness of the road sections, estimate the costs, and then contract these sections to businesses, with the government responsible for acceptance testing. Compared to the government doing these things, businesses are more flexible, which reduces the government's workload. The key is to ensure the quality of the projects. Even the reconstruction of Athens could adopt this approach, dividing the city's reconstruction into phases. The government would inspect each phase before dispersing funds, which could alleviate some of the financial pressure on the government. The current Greek government is reasonably complete, but most members are newly appointed, many lacking prior governing experience. This requires time for them to learn and adapt. However, a 5-year plan, a nationwide and systematic national plan, places extremely high demands on the capabilities and even the number of government personnel. With so many things to handle at once, the government's manpower is severely insufficient, inevitably leading to mistakes, even basic errors. Otto anticipates that various problems will inevitably arise. Of course, this government action is also extremely beneficial for training people. The truly talented individuals will be showcased in this 5-year plan, while simultaneously weeding out unqualified officials and promoting those with real ability. Precisely because these officials lack experience, and to avoid any major chaos, Otto is also preparing to delegate some government work. Although the road construction is supposed to be a bidding process, given Greece's current financial situation, Profit margins will undoubtedly be tightly controlled, leaving very limited benefits. Most shrewd businessmen will be unwilling to participate, thus requiring the involvement and investment of the royal family. Furthermore, the third point in the next 5-year plan, regarding industrial investment, will primarily focus on attracting foreign investment, with the government providing relevant preferential policies. Otto knew perfectly well that Greece's current situation made it difficult to attract large capitalists. The only industries those merchants might invest in were primary industries like textiles. He had done cost calculations, investing in heavy industries like railways, steel mills, military factories, and machine shops in Greece, even with various incentives, would inevitably result in meager profits, or even losses. Therefore, it was virtually impossible to attract experienced foreign investors. If the royal consortium didn't intervene, those who participated would mostly be either impulsive fools, speculators, or even swindlers. Otto had already planned to have the royal consortium take over, using its own funds to safeguard the 5-year plan and cooperate with the government's development strategy. This approach, of course, carried a high probability of loss, but as king, he couldn't afford not to invest in industries that could strengthen the nation, unless Otto intended for Greece to remain a small Mediterranean country. With the government lacking funds, Otto had to intervene personally. Naturally, Otto also instructed his chief steward, Vester, to establish several shell companies, seemingly unrelated to the royal consortium, to operate them. The existence of agricultural and fishing companies had already made the royal consortium somewhat visible within Greece. If the domestic railways and numerous enterprises belong to the royal conglomerate, it may not be immediately apparent, but in a few decades, it will inevitably put the royal family in the spotlight and will also be detrimental to Greece's future investment attraction efforts. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28 Education. Regarding the development of heavy industry, Article 3, the Greek government primarily provides support. While there may be plans for future investment in heavy industry when government funds are sufficient, current development relies on investments from major capitalists like Otto. Fortunately, Greece is a small country, and Otto's capital can afford it. As for Article 4, the plan to support the development of light industry, it mainly focuses on textiles and food processing. Compared to heavy industry, these light industries are more likely to be profitable and generate tax revenue for the country. The Greek government has also put considerable effort into solving the raw material and sales channel issues for the textile industry, contacting Egypt and the United States for raw materials. Both countries now cultivate cotton on a large scale, and the Greek government is preparing to discuss economic cooperation with these countries, importing cotton from them. As for sales, the main targets are countries in the German region and the Mediterranean region, such as the Kingdom of Prussia, Bavaria, Austria, the Ottoman Empire, and the states of Italy. The Greek government will try to negotiate a favorable tariff agreement for textiles. While Otto has already planned to have the royal family's financial group underpin his heavy industry plans, light industry has the potential to attract some investment. Of course, Otto will certainly have a say in this as well. He's not a saint, nor is he a fool. There's no reason for him to only invest in loss-making industries while ignoring the potentially lucrative light industry. Otto had prepared in advance. While he was in London attending the London Peace Conference, his chief steward, West, had been in England researching the textile industry. After some effort, the Royal Consortium successfully recruited several experts knowledgeable in the latest automatic looms and planned to invest in establishing an automatic loom manufacturing plant. To expedite the process, the Royal Consortium also ordered a batch of new looms from a British machine shop, which had already been shipped to the established factory. They were currently testing the machines and recruiting workers. Meanwhile, cotton imported from Egypt had already set sail from the port of Alexandria. Egyptian ruler Ali introduced cotton cultivation to make money, and through connections within France, a long-term supply agreement was signed. Furthermore, the Royal Consortium, based on agricultural experts' advice, purchased vast tracts of land suitable for cotton cultivation within the Ottoman Empire. The local climate was well suited for cotton, and the governors of those regions, upon receiving checks, readily sold large tracts of land at low prices to agricultural companies. It is estimated that once the profits from cotton cultivation become apparent, landowners around the agricultural companies will proactively cultivate cotton themselves. Venus' Secret is now venturing into clothing, with its apparel brands using products from the textile factories. This has preemptively solved some of the sales problems for the Royal Consortium's textile factories, and the profits are expected to be substantial. They are also involved in the grape industry, employing professional winemakers to produce wines that can be packaged and promoted by Venus' Secret and sold worldwide. The Bavarian royal family has already placed a pre-order, and King Ludwig I has promised to help with promotion. A large portion of the Royal Consortium's investments in light industry are focused on the high-end market, and overall, they are more profitable than their competitors. As for the low-end market, the Royal Consortium does not plan to get too involved, mainly because it is beyond their management capabilities. Even with the advanced information technology of later generations, large conglomerates still face numerous management challenges, let alone today. After arranging things in the industrial sector, the next step was education, which was also Otto's primary concern. The Minister of Education then stepped forward and stated, regarding investment in education, we have divided it into basic education, advanced technical education, and university education. Basic education primarily involves collaborating with the Royal Agricultural and Fishing Companies to organize literacy classes for adults, where the government teaches them to read and write, while also disseminating relevant policies and laws. For school-aged children, we are establishing primary schools to provide comprehensive primary education resources from a young age, teaching them the Greek language and script, as well as basic mathematics and science. Addressing the current teacher shortage, we have reached cooperation agreements with churches, agricultural companies, and fishing companies, who can provide some teachers. To prevent these children from having to help with chores at a young age and wasting the prime learning years, the government, churches, and royal companies can provide funding to provide these children with a daily meal and basic learning materials. Meanwhile, primary schools will conduct exams every 3 months, and students with excellent grades will receive awards, medals, and small bonuses. These high-achieving students will also be given opportunities for advancement, with subsidies and scholarships for further education in secondary school and even university, thus cultivating more talent. Otto proposed increasing student assessments and providing more rewards for outstanding students, precisely to allow students and, more importantly, parents to see the benefits of their children's academic success. While people today may have less exposure to such ideas, they are also very pragmatic. Schools provide lunch and learning materials, reducing the burden on children's schooling. Crucially, good grades are rewarded, which is tantamount to openly telling parents that education can earn money. In elementary school, scholarships can completely compensate for the loss of a small laborer in the family. Once they reached secondary school, technical school, or university, those with excellent grades not only didn't have to pay for their education, but they also received more rewards than farmers earned. After graduation, the government and royal conglomerates were eager to hire them. Europe didn't have the tradition of all professions are inferior except for education because, unlike the Far Eastern empires, it didn't have an early imperial examination system. The saying there are houses of gold and beauties in books wasn't just a saying. In ancient times, when the results of the imperial examinations were announced, wealthy families and merchants would immediately seek out sons-in-law. Houses, women, and money rained down upon them. It truly was a case of 10 years of hard study go unnoticed. But one day of success brings fame throughout the land. Ordinary people could change their destiny through education, and Chinese parents, if they had the means, would send their children to school. In feudal Europe, there was no imperial examination system, and all official positions were monopolized by the aristocracy. Even talented children from ordinary families had no chance of advancement, so they were not as enthusiastic about sending their children to school as the Chinese. It wasn't until modern times, with the development of science and technology and industrialization, that the demand for highly skilled workers increased. Driven by this demand, countries that realized this increased their investment in education, giving Europeans more opportunities to receive education and change their destiny. For example, the Kingdom of Prussia, recognizing the importance of education, popularized basic education earlier than other countries, which allowed it to catch up in the industrial age and lay a solid foundation for Germany's future development. Regarding public education, opinions were relatively even. Some had previously felt that spending so much money on it wasn't worthwhile, and Otto had specifically called them in for a talk. In fact, besides the regular subjects of later education, Otto added many personal touches to basic education, incorporating numerous military training subjects. These included drills like marching, forced marches, and trench digging. While lacking firearms training, these significantly enhanced the quality of future Greek soldiers and reduced the difficulty of training them. This training continued indefinitely, even extending to secondary and university levels, with related military subjects teaching basic military knowledge. When needed, these individuals would be excellent reservists or even reserve officers. The purpose of this was clear. Otto was currently preparing Greece to follow a militaristic path. Although militarism is a policy criticized in later generations, as a person from a later era living in a time of great strife, Otto knew that this was the only way for small countries to expand. Large countries could develop step by step, while small countries could only seek opportunities to gamble their national fortunes. Success would bring enormous profits, while failure would result in utter ruin and the loss of everything. This might sound irrational, but as a small country, its choices were limited: either humbly remain subservient between the major powers, struggling to survive while playing both sides, or gamble everything and try to become a true power. As a reborn individual, Otto, having achieved financial freedom, naturally harbored higher ambitions. The deep-seated Greek idealism would not tolerate a mediocre, complacent king. Therefore, whether considering personal aspirations or the current state of Greece, Otto had no choice but to choose this path. Of course, Otto constantly warned himself that the current militarism was a necessity driven by reality. If he succeeded once or twice, gaining the authority to engage in dialogue with powers like Britain, France, and Russia, he would inevitably have to gradually shift national policy. Military traditions could remain, but militarism could not last. Even with one or two successes, gambling with the entire nation's fate was not a guarantee of perpetual success. A single misstep could lead to the loss of everything. Chapter 29 University of Athens. In addition to public education, there was also the training and education of military officers and soldiers, which complemented Greece's military arrangements. This era was one of great competition, and all countries invested heavily in their military. Countries like Britain, France, Russia, and Austria typically allocated 30% to 40% of their national income to military expenditures. Historically, the Balkan states faced severe military pressures, with military expenditures often accounting for 50% or more of their budgets. In contrast, Greece's current military expenditures consist of only the government's 3,000-strong army, a very small percentage of its budget. This is due to Otto's strategy of keeping the military within the civilian population and having the majority of military expenses currently borne by the royal family. The royal family currently maintains a 6,000-strong Guard of Honor, reorganized into a streamlined division, and the 3,000-strong navy is also paid for by the Royal Foundation. Meanwhile, agricultural companies in various locations, besides farming, also organized military training for farmers during their off-season. In just a few years, these trained farmers would become excellent recruits, ready to go to the battlefield with weapons. In addition, under Otto's orders, the agricultural companies expanded extensively throughout the Balkans under different guises. The farm workers in these areas, besides farming and working in peacetime, could become Otto's hidden private army when needed. Although these private armies, with only basic military training, were weak in direct combat, if well organized, they could act as guerrillas, harassing the rear and effectively establishing bases behind enemy lines. At present, European countries lack awareness in this regard. Coupled with the tradition of private armies within traditional European territories, this military force goes unnoticed, providing Otto with an opportunity for its unseen expansion. In addition, Otto placed great emphasis on officer education, supporting soldiers' academic pursuits. Those with excellent grades could enter military schools and, after passing examinations, become officers. Although the Greek army didn't have many officer positions, agricultural companies' farms across the country could easily absorb them, and the Greek army had a large number of officer rank. If they couldn't afford a full army, they could create more officers, allowing for rapid expansion when needed. The only sector requiring more investment was the navy. Unlike the army, the navy demands higher standards from its soldiers and officers, as operating naval warships requires more specialized knowledge and extensive experience. Otto could only use the 3 newly purchased state-of-the-art steam warships as training vessels, rotating them among the navy for training, increasing the intensity of training at the cost of higher training expenses. On January 4, 1833, Greece announced its latest 5-year plan. While the policy of state intervention in economic development and planned economy is questioned by many today, this day is also known by later historians as the day of the restoration of the Greek Byzantine Empire. Following the policy announcement, the Greek government sprang into action. To raise funds, the first batch of construction bonds was jointly issued by the National Bank of Greece and the Royal Bank of Greece. The National Bank of Greece, clearly established by the Greek government, recently joined the newly formed Royal Bank of Greece in undertaking the monetary reform and issuing the new Greek currency, the dramark. The establishment of the Royal Bank was also necessary, with the expansion of the Royal Consortium. Having a bank facilitates financial transactions and better ensures the security of funds and the financial information of the Royal Consortium. The newly established Royal Bank set up branches in Germany, Britain, France, and even Russia to assist with the financial operations of its businesses in these regions. The new bond issuance plan aimed to raise 200 million drachmas, roughly £10 million, equivalent to 6 years of the Greek government's revenue. According to the 5-year plan, the bonds were issued in 3 tranches over 3 years, with an interest rate of only 4%, a remarkably low rate for the time. The first tranche totaled 80 million drachmas, of which the Royal Consortium subscribed to a quarter, with the remainder largely distributed among various entities affiliated with a Royal Consortium. Unfortunately, in an era where interest rates generally started at 10%, the interest rates on Greek government bonds were simply too low to be attractive. Most Greeks were poor, and the wealthy had been largely wiped out after the recent financial purges. Otto had to secretly bail them out himself. Bearing such immense financial pressure, even with prior preparations, Otto couldn't help but lament that he didn't have enough money. Before his rebirth, he toiled for a meager wage. After becoming king, he still worried about money constantly, even having to find ways to cut expenses, forcing him to postpone his plans to build a new palace in Athens. Construction and investment were largely handled by the government and its staff, while Otto focused primarily on education, especially the founding of the University of Athens, Greece's first university. The University of Athens was also part of Athens' urban redevelopment plan, designed for the city's suburbs. Construction began quickly at the designated location. As for the university's president, since no one in Greece was familiar with the construction of a modern university, Otto simply assumed the title himself. After all, he had attended university in his previous life and had even worked as a clerk in the student council, so he was familiar with the university's structure. Because of his emphasis on education and his considerable prestige, most local Greek scholars expressed their support. Of course, Otto couldn't devote all his energy to the university. He was only responsible for setting up a framework, guiding the division of departments, and defining positions and responsibilities. The actual management was left to others, so Otto hired management personnel and some teachers from Bavaria, France, Austria-Hungary, and Britain. By June, the main building of the still rather rudimentary University of Athens was completed. Even in order to start the semester on time, only 2 buildings were completed, with many more planned buildings awaiting construction, not to mention interior decoration. However, at this point, there was no need to be so picky. Starting the semester early and quickly training the necessary talent was the most important thing. Now, all sectors of Greek society, even the royal family and financial groups, were waiting for talent to be recruited. The students could simply overcome the less than ideal conditions. On July 2, 1833, Otto convened a school management meeting to determine the number of students admitted in the first cohort and the division of departments. After exchanging a few polite words with the school's key personnel, Otto said, "All right. Let's begin the meeting." "Yes, Felix, hired from Austria," replied cheerfully, "the University of Athens has just been established. For this admissions process, we cooperated with the Ministry of Education to determine the number of students to be admitted and the number of students in each major. We began preparing for the entrance examinations 3 months ago, with the questions being created by the heads of the various departments present here, leading their respective faculty members. Due to Greece's demand for talent, the University of Athens will primarily admit students in science and engineering, totaling 1,260 students across all related disciplines, 480 students in agriculture-related subjects, and finally 470 students in literature and art-related subjects." Otto nodded. Based on the 21 majors across the various departments, the enrollment was only a little over 2,000 people, which, frankly, wasn't many, considering that universities in later generations typically had tens of thousands of students. So Otto asked, then how many people applied in the first batch? Chapter 30 University Opening. Your Majesty, Felix replied, based on preliminary publicity and investigations, the number of applicants so far is between 3,500 and 4,300. It is anticipated that even fewer will pass the exam, only about a third of the applicants. Everyone's expression changed slightly. With such a limited number of applicants, to ensure the quality of the student body, the number of those who pass might not even meet the enrollment target. It sounded somewhat unbelievable, but in Greece today, this number was considerable, even excessive. Many of these students were likely from Otto's former Bavarian territories. In this era before widespread education, few ordinary people received basic education. Those who could afford to pay for schooling were at least middle-class families. Considering both insufficient funding and a lack of students, trade-offs also need to be made in other areas, such as reducing the number of students in some departments due to insufficient enrollment. Your Majesty, because of the country's demand for science and engineering talent, our enrollment in arts and humanities-related disciplines is already relatively small. Now, to cut it by more than half is simply too much, people protested after Otto raised this issue. It's not just about reducing enrollment. The Ministry of Education's funding is limited. To conserve educational resources, disciplines like music and art should be cancelled outright and merged into newly added courses in history and literature, Felix emphasized. What? How can this be? Many people were shocked. In fact, this is unavoidable. As the president, I don't want to do this either, but we lack the funds. Seeing the growing enthusiasm among the students in the arts-related programs, many of whom were local Greeks, Otto quickly said, now is a crucial moment for Greece's development. Our primary goal is industrialization, and the second is protecting our domestic agriculture. Therefore, the current talent training at the University of Athens is all in service of developing industry and agriculture. These are necessary sacrifices. Striving to rapidly develop Greece inevitably requires making some trade-offs. You are all sitting here for our great dream of reviving Greece. Now is the time for everyone to make sacrifices. Can you all understand? Faced with Otto's assertive attitude, these Greek scholars, though somewhat reluctant, at least acquiesced to the current situation. After all, they had to admit that at this stage, the development of industry and agriculture was far more important than the arts. Of course, how to specifically view majors and enrollment numbers was the job of the vice-chancellor and others, not Otto himself. Moreover, the difficulties for these art majors didn't stop there. Because of insufficient education funding, the government could waive tuition and fees for STEM majors, but there were no subsidies for humanities majors. Government funding, including private donations, is prioritized for science and engineering programs. Science and engineering students receive the lion's share, agriculture students get a meager cut, and arts students receive nothing. Students also receive no tuition reductions or subsidies and must pay in full. The reason is simple. At present, arts graduates have very limited value for Greece, which urgently needs to strengthen its national power. Promoting Greek culture relies more on local basic education and missionaries. Greek language and history will become compulsory courses, not separate admissions. The development of arts and culture can wait until the country becomes stronger, reaching the level of a major power. Of course, it's foreseeable that in the coming years, students from the University of Athens will become the backbone of future Greece, leaders in various fields, just like the first batches of university students after the reform and opening up of Tokyo University. To ensure these students learn as much knowledge as possible in the shortest amount of time, they won't have the opportunity to experience the freedom and relaxed atmosphere of future universities. These university students will enjoy the same treatment as students from top high schools at Tokyo University. Weekends are non-existent, making them arguably the most miserable university students in the world right now. As a result, the news sparked another round of discussion, mainly within Greece. Other countries internationally rarely pay attention to the news of a small country like Greece establishing a university within its borders. The media also discussed the issue, and with Otto's guidance and promotion, the reason for this was widely accepted as being for the development of Greece. Even some professors whose courses were cut, regardless of their private complaints, publicly portrayed themselves as patriots, stating that it was for Greece's development. concentrating limited educational resources for the country's benefit, and that they were making this sacrifice voluntarily. Located on the Mediterranean coast, Greece has relatively mild summer temperatures, and the students arriving from all over were spirited, energetic, and full of confidence. Especially after Otto proclaimed that he was studying for the Great Revival of Greece, many young Greeks felt a heavy sense of historical responsibility due to the influence of public opinion. In Greece, university students have always been a prestigious term. During the Ottoman Empire, the only way to study at a modern university was to go abroad to study in other developed countries. The enormous cost of studying abroad could financially cripple even wealthy Greek families, so very few Greeks went to study overseas. Now, with the opportunity to attend university domestically, and with subsidies available for many subjects, the financial burden has been greatly reduced. Those who are eligible are unwilling to give up this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The first entrance examination for the University of Athens began in 1833, marking the beginning of Greece's university entrance examination system. The three-day college entrance examination covered a wide range of topics, reflecting the diverse needs of different majors and encompassing knowledge from various industries. A special admissions policy was also implemented, primarily considering professional exam scores. Even with 0 scores in other subjects, students could still be admitted if the professional exam scores were exceptionally high. However, the students are unaware that after 3.5 days of testing, the vast majority have lost their initial enthusiasm and confidence, suffering a severe blow. Many complained about the difficulty of the exam and regretted their lack of prior knowledge. On the other hand, these candidates didn't need to worry about their majors. The school would basically assign them suitable majors based on their grades in each subject. And job placement was guaranteed after graduation, a special policy during a special period. Otto was fairly satisfied with the results of this admissions process. Although there were many shortcomings due to lack of experience, it was the first time, and he couldn't be too demanding. He was relieved that no one had cheated. To commemorate his previous life, Otto set the start date for the semester on September 1st, a date he knew well. On the first day, Otto gave a speech, mainly reviewing Greek history and looking ahead to Greece's future. Then, amidst the cheers of over 1,600 students, they began their university life. Looking at these students' spirited and energetic demeanor, Otto couldn't help but feel a surge of emotion. These were the future of the nation. Seeing the intensive course schedule, he felt a touch of schadenfreude, knowing these students would soon discover the grueling nature of university life. The University of Athens now employs a closed, militarized management system, with a staggering 12 classes a day, plus self-study time. From waking up at 6 in the morning to finishing at 10:30 at night, aside from meals and brief rest periods, they will spend the next 4 years in intense study, accompanied by a dense examination schedule. Naturally, this arrangement has garnered support from many highly respected scholars and educators, as the concept of happy education is practically non-existent these days. Chapter 31 Year-End Summary. To ensure the successful completion of the 5-year plan, Greek government officials were extremely busy. A year later, at the cabinet meeting at the end of 1833, Prime Minister Sanos, beaming, said, "Your Majesty, the domestic economy is developing very well. In the past year alone, we have attracted as much as 87 million drachmas in investment." Looking at the delighted cabinet members, Otto smiled and nodded, signaling him to continue, but inwardly he thought, what's so great about it? More than half of it is in the name of royal consortiums. Real private capital and foreign capital probably account for less than 40% at most. Prime Minister Sanos continued, so far this year, 176 new factories of various sizes have been established nationwide, including 6 factories with capital exceeding 5 million drachmas and employing more than 1,000 people. The government has invested a total of 77 million drachmas, mainly for road construction, water conservancy projects, and the reconstruction of Athens, with overall progress going smoothly. This year's fiscal revenue has more than doubled compared to previous years in Greece, reaching 86 million drachmas, mainly from agricultural taxes, with a growth rate nearly twice that of the original expectations. Next year, we will continue to promote industrialization and increase government investment in infrastructure. Currently, the main focus is on completing highway projects, as well as bridges, ports, and water conservancy facilities, creating favorable conditions for economic development. Otto knew that many Greek nobles who previously owned land basically didn't pay taxes. Now that his agricultural company had taken over, even with a relatively low tax rate, this tax had increased dramatically, causing a surge in government revenue. There might be some further growth, but it wouldn't be as exaggerated as this year. The increase in government revenue was also good for him, meaning the government had money to do more, allowing the royal consortium to focus more on other areas. He smiled and said, "It seems the government has done a very effective job over the past year. Thank you all for your hard work." Just then, General Courant, representing the military, stepped forward. To maintain control of the army, Otto had promoted Colonel Courant to lieutenant general and placed him in the cabinet as Minister of War. Courant was very grateful for this, as the government's focus for the next 5 years was on infrastructure development, which naturally meant less investment in the military. Even Otto's royal consortium, due to its massive investments, didn't have enough funds to spend on the military. Having a military background himself, upon hearing of the government's improved financial situation, he couldn't help but stand up for the military. "Your Majesty, we have reorganized the entire army, strengthened officer training, and established clear career advancement paths. Morale is high, and soldiers are training harder. However, the domestic military industry is still lagging behind, only able to produce ordinary guns and ammunition, and artillery can only produce small-caliber cannons. The newly opened shipyards can only build small warships, unable to meet the Army and Navy's equipment needs." This was clearly an attempt to vie for the budget. At Prime Minister Sanos's prompting, the finance minister stepped forward and said, "The Army and Navy are currently well equipped. As far as I know, the Army is equipped with the latest technology. The Navy added 3 more state-of-the-art steam-powered warships this year, which is sufficient for now. The government doesn't have the funds to expand the military and upgrade equipment. Although government revenue has increased significantly, don't forget our issued bonds, which require substantial repayments every year. Because of this expenditure, fiscal revenue appears to have increased considerably, but in reality, it is limited compared to the planned surplus." Other cabinet ministers then stepped forward, presenting reports indicating that while the increase in government revenue was indeed good news, it was insufficient to cover all the additional income, and the military should not be considered for the time being. Otto considered carefully before speaking. The problem of military equipment does indeed need to be addressed. Military factories need to increase investment to keep pace with mainstream weaponry and accelerate the research and development of new weapons. Shipyards need to accumulate technology step by step. At this stage, they can only focus on building large fishing vessels and ocean-going merchant ships, but they will prepare for the technological development of steam-powered warships. At the same time, military training and officer development cannot be neglected. At the latest, once the 5-year plan is completed, the government must increase its investment in the military. The military must guarantee that, 5 years from now, when the nation needs it, it can build an elite force as quickly as possible. Next, the Minister of Agriculture stepped forward. "Your Majesty, agricultural development this year has been gratifying. Not only has the cultivated area increased significantly, but thanks to the promotion of new agricultural technologies, yield per mu has also increased, and agricultural tax revenue has doubled. Once next year's plan is completed, domestic grain production will further increase, and income will also see a certain increase. In addition, regarding grape cultivation, because newly planted grapes require more than 3 years to harvest, many new vineyards, apart from some existing vineyards, will have to wait several years before they can collect agricultural taxes. Therefore, it is expected that agricultural tax revenue will continue to increase steadily over the next 3 years, after which it will enter a stable period. In addition, our encouragement of the marine fishing industry has been very effective, enriching the dining tables of the domestic population and generating a significant amount of new tax revenue. These are mostly the results of agricultural and fishery companies, but Otto still smiled and encouraged them. Good. Keep up the good work and strive to reach the next level next year. The last to stand up and speak was the Minister of Education. Although the Minister of Education's authority seems low, due to Greece's emphasis on education, the Minister of Education ranks quite high in the cabinet. Your Majesty, the education sector has made rapid progress this year, the Minister of Education cleared his throat and said. In addition to the opening of the University of Athens, 3 newly built teacher training colleges, 1 medical college, and 5 vocational and technical schools have been completed and are ready to begin enrolling students. Once the students from the teacher training colleges graduate, The shortage of qualified teachers in Greece will be greatly alleviated. At the same time, our literacy education is also progressing well. The number of illiterate people has decreased by 10%, and it is expected that illiteracy will be basically eliminated within 10 years. Otto nodded in satisfaction. This Minister of Education was originally a Greek refugee recruited by Otto during the war. He might lack autonomy, but his execution ability was undeniable. Otto promoted him to the position of Minister of Education precisely because of this quality. Otto believed that Greece, at this time, was among the top few governments in terms of its emphasis on education and willingness to pay the price. He thought that as long as the Minister of Education implemented his educational arrangements without fail, that would be sufficient. Following the Minister of Education was the Minister of Industry, whose report was passionate and filled with jubilation over the rapid development of Greek industry. Otto himself understood this aspect even better than many members of the cabinet. In the past year, the Royal Consortium had invested in steel mills, military factories, machine manufacturing plants, and shipyards in Greece. It could be said that Greece's heavy industry was now single-handedly supported by the Royal Consortium. Otto not only invested heavily in these factories, but for a long time to come, most of them would only earn meager profits, and could even incur losses. As a resource-poor country, Greece lacks iron ore and high-quality coal mines within its borders, requiring imports from other countries. This naturally increases costs compared to countries with coal and iron resources. However, Greece's coastal location and developed maritime industry, coupled with lower ocean shipping costs, mitigated some of these expenses. Furthermore, investments in light industry and agriculture generated substantial returns, particularly in the high-end luxury goods sector, which was incredibly lucrative. Otherwise, the Royal Consortium's domestic investments could easily have resulted in losses. Finally, the Minister of Transport took the stage. Over the past year, the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry of Education have been the highest spenders. With their tireless efforts, the results have been remarkable. Thanks to the 70,000 workers recruited from within the Ottoman Empire, both railway and highway construction have progressed rapidly. The railway from Nafplio to Athens will be completed in at most 4 months. Having gained experience, the next few railways have been surveyed or are nearing completion and construction has begun. Furthermore, because the railways are exclusively licensed for operation, requiring no government investment, it is estimated that by the end of the 5-year plan, the total railway mileage in Greece will significantly exceed the planned 800 kilometers. Chapter 32 The Ionian Islands. In the spring of 1833, Archbishop Eugene, appointed by Greece as the Orthodox Archbishop of the Balkans, received an invitation to visit St. Petersburg. Because Otto had assigned him so many tasks that year, Archbishop Eugene was extremely busy, and his visit to Russia had to be postponed several times, finally taking place at the end of the year. Several months later, Archbishop Eugene returned from St. Petersburg, radiant with joy. Clearly, his trip to Russia had been very successful, and the harsh winter of St. Petersburg had not dampened his enthusiasm. Upon his return, Archbishop Eugene began to frequently discuss with cabinet members the advantages of the alliance with Russia, primarily in matters of faith and national strategy, where both sides shared a common enemy. None of the cabinet members gave a clear answer. While the cabinet handles Greece's day-to-day affairs, Otto makes all the major decisions. As a small country, Greece places paramount importance on foreign policy, and no cabinet member would publicly express their opinion on this matter until Otto gave a clear stance. Realizing this, Archbishop Eugene went directly to the palace to discuss the matter with Otto. Your Majesty, Bishop Eugene passionately persuaded Otto, Russia and Greece are natural allies. Since the War of Independence, we have received Russia's assistance. In particular, to realize our dream of Greek revival, a war with the Ottomans is inevitable. From this perspective, Russia is an even more natural ally, and an alliance with Russia is essential. He swore in the name of God that this suggestion was made for the sake of Greece's future. Judging from Bishop Eugene's demeanor, Otto knew he had been misled in St. Petersburg. Bishop Eugene was well versed in doctrine, insightful in education, and an upright man, the very reasons Otto had chosen him to lead the Greek Orthodox Church. However, Bishop Eugene has a shortcoming: he is not very politically astute and lacks the necessary insight into complex international relations. Bishop Eugene, you're right. Looking solely at the relationship between Greece, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire, Russia is indeed Greece's natural ally. Otto pondered his words, Speaking slowly, but the international situation is more complex than you imagine, and we must consider all aspects of international relations. Crucially, we must consider the attitudes of other powers, at least those of Britain, France, and Austria. A recent message from Britain has forced me to be cautious about forming an alliance with Russia. Reluctantly, Otto had to explain to Bishop Eugene the complex relationships between the various powers in the Near East. Just recently, Britain, France, Austria, the Ottoman Empire, and other countries reached an agreement through covert contacts, signing an alliance regarding Russia's actions in the Near East. According to the treaty, if Russia unilaterally attempts to expand in the Near East, the other countries have a responsibility to persuade Russia to abandon such dangerous behavior. This alliance primarily involves consensus among the countries that if Russia uses force in the Near East, they must work together to stop it. Of course, the level of this intervention varies. Countries like France and Austria will likely engage in diplomatic mediation or even remain neutral, while Britain and the Ottoman Empire will be the main forces opposing Russia. Britain itself was aware of this situation. But they had already achieved their goal, a subtle adjustment to the Vienna Union system to further ensure the mutual checks and balances among the nations in the Near East and to curb Russian expansion in the region. Greece, as a Balkan nation, also sent representatives to this secret meeting, brought in by Britain. Of course, as a small country, Greece had little say, and no one paid attention to its statements. Greece could only follow Britain's lead. Otto had no recollection of this event, but it's clear that this was Britain maintaining its consistent continental balance policy. Uniting with other powers to contain Russia, currently the strongest power on the European continent, was Britain's most important foreign policy at this stage. Britain's decision to include Greece was clearly intended to make Otto understand the situation and confirm Greece's position, otherwise, Greece would not have been qualified to participate. The impact of this agreement on Greece has not yet become apparent, but it has completely dispelled Otto's idea of an alliance with Russia. Bishop Eugene, if we ally with Russia and join them against the Ottoman Empire, it would be tantamount to making enemies of the great powers that signed the treaty. Bishop Eugene was taken aback upon hearing this news, but I remember Austria is an ally of Russia, and Britain's relations with Russia have always been quite good in recent years. Otto said seriously, the conclusion of this treaty shows that although Austria and Russia have a relatively close relationship, Austria does not want Russia to continue expanding in the Near East. Britain and Russia have a close relationship, but this is only in terms of frequent economic transactions. It does not mean that the two countries are aligned in terms of national strategy. Not to mention the other great powers. Given Russia's power, unless it initiates a war against the Ottoman Empire, these countries are unlikely to provoke it and may even vie to maintain friendly relations. However, they will inevitably target Greece, and even simple trade sanctions could inflict significant losses on Greece. Therefore, Bishop Eugene, until the international situation changes, refrain from discussing an alliance with Russia. Greece is a small country with no power to influence the international landscape, so its overall diplomatic principle is stability. Continue to maintain close relations with Britain, while also valuing relations with France, Austria, and Russia, and continue to advance our friendly relations with the great powers, laying the foundation for the current steady development of the Greek economy. Having received this advice, Bishop Eugene's initial enthusiasm gradually subsided, realizing that his previous thinking had been too simplistic, and he took his leave with a look of shame. At this British-initiated conference targeting Russia, Otto actually had one more thing he didn't have time to mention. During the conference, under Otto's instructions, the Greek ambassador seized the opportunity to make a request to Britain, the return of the British-owned Ionian Islands. The British Ionian Islands, bordering the Greek peninsula, were used by Britain as a port for the Royal Navy to extend its control over the Mediterranean, and a governor was stationed there. For Britain, the Ionian Islands were merely an insignificant colonial territory, as the Mediterranean ranked very low in British naval strategy. Britain's meticulously crafted policy of continental balancing aimed to prevent the emergence of a single unifying power on the European continent. If such a power did appear, it would inevitably focus its attention on Britain, separated from the European continent only by the English Channel, thus impacting Britain's maritime-centric national strategy. This is precisely why, during Napoleon's time, in order to defeat France, Britain not only acted as the financial backer of the anti-French coalition behind the scenes, but also actively participated in numerous wars with France. In Britain's naval strategy, the Atlantic Ocean was at the forefront, followed by the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and then the Mediterranean. In the Mediterranean, Britain already possessed the Strait of Gibraltar, the gateway to the Mediterranean. With the Strait of Gibraltar in hand, the Mediterranean was essentially locked down by Britain. Any country wanting to enter or leave the Mediterranean had to defer to Britain. Furthermore, Britain acquired Malta as a naval outpost in the Mediterranean with the signing of the Treaty of Vienna. With control of the Strait of Gibraltar and Malta as a foothold in the Mediterranean, Britain's actual emphasis on the Ionian Islands was quite low. In the original history, after Otto became king of Greece, he promoted Pan-Hellenicism and pursued a long-term policy of aligning with Russia. This led to consistently poor relations between Greece and Britain during this period, with Greece even facing a joint Anglo-French naval blockade of its ports. This continued until the original Otto was overthrown and George I, Prince of Denmark, was elected as the new king of Greece. To demonstrate the friendly relations between Britain and Greece, Britain even voluntarily ceded the Ionian Islands to Greece, hoping to strengthen ties. This world's Otto, however, chose a different policy after assuming the throne. He maintained excellent relations with British political circles, and Greece and Britain enjoyed extremely close economic cooperation. Therefore, Otto took the initiative to make this request, wanting to try to regain Greek ownership of the Ionian Islands through diplomatic means. Chapter 33 Expecting the first bird to shoot out. Faced with Greece's request, Britain was initially somewhat surprised. Prime Minister Viscount Grey consulted with others and consulted maps before finally locating the Ionian Islands. While Britain was not yet at its peak, the vastness of its global colonies was enough to earn it the title of an empire on which the sun never sets. The Ionian Islands possessed neither abundant resources nor strategic importance. Viscount Grey, as Prime Minister, had never even heard of the place before. To this day, Britain had been losing money on the Ionian Viceroyalty, and given its low strategic value, the Ionian Islands were essentially a liability for Britain. Especially after Otto ascended the throne, Greece experienced rapid development, leading many people who originally lived on the Ionian Islands to migrate there, further exacerbating the economic downturn. The Ionian Islands required annual subsidies from Britain to maintain their operations. Historically, the Ionian Islands were Greek territory, and considering the long-standing friendly relations with Greece and Greece's role in balancing the Near East, he was inclined to agree to Greece's conditions. However, Viscount Grey did not make a direct decision. After consulting with the cabinet and King William IV, he submitted the proposal to return the Ionian Islands to the British Parliament for a decision. In February 1834, Parliament narrowly passed a motion. The motion stated that, to demonstrate friendship between Britain and Greece and for the stability of the Near East, Britain could return the Ionian Islands to Greece. However, the British Navy could still be stationed on the islands when needed, and Greece would have to pay £350,000 British pounds to recoup British investment in British Ionia. The cabinet and the Greek people considered it a good thing to reclaim the Ionian Islands for only £350,000 British pounds, and it was considered one of the greatest diplomatic achievements after Greek independence. Meanwhile, cabinet members now looked at Otto with somewhat strange eyes. Before this, no one thought Britain would so easily return the Ionian Islands. Many cabinet members even felt that making this request rashly would provoke British anger. To be precise, Otto had already received British assistance before even ascending the throne, recovering the Thessalonians from the Ottoman Empire, and now he had directly reclaimed the Ionian Islands from Britain. He seemed almost like the British king's illegitimate son. Otherwise, it's hard to understand why Britain would favor Greece so much. Otto offered no explanation. His two successes, frankly, stemmed from his clear understanding of history, his grasp of British strategic direction, and the results of his prior work in Britain. Historical events allowed Otto to conclude that Greece played a significant role in Britain's Mediterranean and Near Eastern strategy. Meanwhile, the Ionian Islands held little value for Britain, making the return of the Ionian Islands highly probable. This was also largely due to Otto's policy of aligning with Britain since becoming King of Greece. Greece's actions to date demonstrate its loyalty to Britain, a crucial factor in Britain's decision to return the Ionian Islands. Britain's alliance against Russia has created a very tense diplomatic situation for Russia, forcing it to face pressure from various allies if it wants to continue its advance into the Balkans. Russia had just fought the Eighth Russo-Turkish War a few years prior, suppressing the Polish Revolution and leaving its treasury depleted. Currently, Russia's strategy in the Near East is virtually devoid of reliable allies. Faced with this domestic and international situation, Nicholas I chose to halt outward expansion and instead focus on domestic reforms and development. Relations between Russia and the Ottoman Empire temporarily eased, and barring major historical shifts, war between the two empires was unlikely for the next decade or so. However, Russia was not the only country eyeing the Ottoman Empire. Ali, the nominal governor of Egypt, was also a contender. In recent years, under Ali's reforms, Egypt's strength has continuously increased, fueling Ali's growing ambitions. In 1831, Egypt even sent troops to Syria, threatening Constantinople, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Eventually, in a desperate move, the Ottoman Empire yielded to Russia, requesting Russian intervention to counter Egypt's threat. Other powers, not wanting Russia to further influence the Ottoman Empire, united to force Ali to withdraw. Faced with a combined threat of the European powers, Ali understood that Egypt was no match for them and had no choice but to withdraw. However, in that war, Egypt still gained control of the Crete and the Hejaz region of the Arabian Peninsula. The territory now occupied by Egypt was nominally part of the Ottoman Empire, but in reality, it was independent and even an enemy of the Ottoman Empire. It's obvious that Ali was unwilling to accept being forced to retreat by the great powers. After his previous defeat, Egypt had been preparing for war and building up its strength in recent years. At the same time, the experience of being jointly interfered with by various countries also led Ali to change his policy, focusing more on diplomacy and seeking support among the great powers, preparing to seize the opportunity to establish an independent state. Meanwhile, Sultan Mahmud I of the Ottoman Empire was also unwilling to accept defeat. Greek independence and Egypt's rebellion were his biggest failures during his reign, thorns in his side. Greece currently enjoys good relations with many major powers and has received a guarantee of stability in the Greek region from Britain, France, and Russia, making it a force to be reckoned with. In contrast, Egypt, which once besieged Constantinople and forced him to bow to his archenemy Russia, is far more hateful. Therefore, Mahmud I is also preparing for war, seeking revenge for this humiliation. The question remains, how and where will the war begin? Sensing the tense atmosphere, Prime Minister Sanos proposed cultivating good relations with Egypt, hoping to seize an opportunity to gain a share of the spoils during a future war between Egypt and the Ottoman Empire. Otto knew that if Greece were to launch a war against the Ottoman Empire, it would have to consider Britain's stance. According to Britain's current strategy of maintaining balance in the Near East, if Greece were to actively disrupt this balance, Britain would certainly retaliate in anger. The mere thought of the British Navy entering the Mediterranean to blockade Greek shipping and attacking coastal ports would be too much for Greece, a country of limited size, to handle. Therefore, Greece absolutely cannot be the first country to break the balance in the Near East. At this point, a country needs to take the lead, so that Greece can potentially profit from the chaos. With such interests at stake, even though Crete, currently controlled by Egypt, is territory that must be reclaimed under Greater Hellenism, Greece still chooses to maintain friendly relations with Egypt. As the Greek textile industry developed, economic ties between the two sides became more frequent. At Otto's suggestion, Greece even hinted to Egypt that it would be pleased to see an increase in independent partners from within the Ottoman Empire, hoping that Greece's veiled support would strengthen Ali's confidence in the war against the Ottomans. Chapter 34 Cultural Identity. As a powerful newcomer to Egypt, the aging but still vigorous Ali understood Greece's intentions. He no longer considered the corrupt Ottoman Empire a threat, and saw the Ottoman territories as his own. In Ali's eyes, Greece was merely a weak nation unable to control its own destiny, a puppet of Britain, its ambitions and strength completely mismatched. Therefore, he didn't take Greece's stance seriously. What he was truly concerned about was the attitude of the major powers, Britain, France, Russia, and Austria. The previous instance of their combined intervention was what truly worried him, so he had been trying to find a breakthrough. If he could gain the support of any one of these four countries, preventing them from reaching a consensus, he was confident he could destroy the Ottoman Empire and replace it, making Egypt the new hegemon of the Near East. Currently, the situation was not optimistic. Apart from France's somewhat ambiguous stance, the other major powers had clearly rejected Egypt's demands. Faced with the Greek representative's hints, Ali made no response, even bluntly stating, Greece should focus more on its domestic affairs. International affairs in the Near East are not Greece's business. After receiving Ali's arrogant reply, Otto outwardly appeared somewhat angry, but inwardly remained calm, merely making a mental note of Egypt's actions. He then went to discuss an economic agreement with Russia with Prime Minister Sanos. Greece is poor in mineral resources, and to achieve industrialization, it must import mineral resources from abroad. From a cost perspective, Austria and Russia are the best choices. Both Austria and Russia possess abundant mineral resources, especially Russia, particularly the Ukrainian region, which boasts extremely rich mineral reserves. Coupled with Russia's relatively underdeveloped industry, mineral exports have always constituted a significant portion of its foreign trade. Ukraine's proximity to the Black Sea coast makes it particularly convenient for mined minerals to be loaded onto ships directly from the Black Sea and traded in the Mediterranean with Greece. From 1833 onwards, Greece implemented its 5-year plan, with railways being a crucial component. As a small country, Greece was geographically limited and sparsely populated. With agriculture and its burgeoning industry absorbing a large workforce, very few people were willing to work as laborers building railways. To ensure the smooth completion of the railway project, and considering the domestic labor shortage, Greece not only sent convicts to construction sites as forced laborers but also imported tens of thousands of workers from the Balkans, now part of the Ottoman Empire. The limited number of criminals within Greece, even after being sent to coal mines by Otto, was not enough. Laborers from various Balkan regions became the main force in building railways and highways in Greece. Railway engineering of this era would be considered a death trap by modern standards, and workplace accidents were commonplace. At that time, machinery had not yet largely replaced manual labor, and construction still relied heavily on carrying loads on shoulders and backs. To recruit enough workers, the Royal Consortium's subsidiary company, which had contracted the project, offered them relatively generous wages. Thanks to the hard work of these laborers, the first railway from Nafplio to Athens was finally completed at the end of March 1834. Otto personally inspected the site and planned to travel to Athens by train to inspect the reconstruction progress after the railway's first official operation. To thank the laborers who had worked tirelessly to build the railway, Otto also arranged for Vester to give priority to recruiting their families and relatives to the agricultural company's farms in the Balkans. The agricultural company, now operating under various guises, has established numerous farms throughout the Balkans. While workers still undergo self-defense militia training, the wages are far higher than renting land from other landowners. Consequently, many Balkan farmers have voted with their feet, actively joining the agricultural company's farms across the region. As a result, the biggest problem plaguing the agricultural company is now a shortage of management personnel. The Ottoman Empire's control over the Balkans was weak, with rampant banditry and robbery in rural areas. Many landowners had bodyguards, making the militia formations on these farms relatively inconspicuous. In this era, the fact that these people came to Greece to work as laborers indicates that they all came from extremely poor backgrounds. Joining the agricultural company's farm was a rare opportunity for their families and relatives. Otto also arranged for a group of missionaries and language teachers. As long as these foreign laborers learned Greek, they would receive extra bonuses. This certainly increased expenses, but as long as even a tenth of it remained, contributing to Greece's development, it would be considered a success. Even after the project was completed, or when they felt they had earned enough money, these laborers, through word of mouth, would spread the word about the benefits of working in Greece back in their hometowns. Although working in Greece is hard work, wages are not deducted, there is no cheating, and workers are compensated for injuries. As a result, when Greece needs more workers, they and those around them are willing to accept employment. In the process of teaching them Greek, incorporating Greek history and other aspects will influence them with Greek culture. This is actually a method Otto has always used, to assimilate the people of the Balkans as much as possible through economic and cultural means, making them spiritually Greek. After all, the Greek population, both domestic and overseas, only amounts to around 5 million, hardly enough to support a large nation. Compared to the major European powers at the same time, France had over 35 million people, the future German territories combined had over 40 million, and Russia had over 70 million. Even including all Greeks, Greece's population was less than a tenth of these major powers, making it impossible to compete. The recent rise in ethnic issues, in Otto's view, is more about cultural identity. If someone identifies with Greek culture, they can be Greek, without needing to worry about bloodlines. This maximizes the assimilation of more people and expands the Greek population base. Furthermore, when it comes to cultural identity, Greece holds a significant advantage in the Balkans. The Balkans are deeply influenced by Greek culture, and historically, the Greeks' influence has extended throughout the Mediterranean region. Greek culture profoundly impacts the surrounding areas, providing the best foundation for assimilating their populations. Of course, this necessitates more sophisticated management of the workforce, requiring higher standards from management personnel. Fortunately, companies under the Royal Consortium have extensive experience in similar roles, cultivating a pool of personnel with relevant expertise. This mentorship system, where experienced staff guide newcomers through on-the-job instruction, may encounter minor issues. But overall progress is moving in the direction Otto desired. To further enhance the assimilation effect, Otto arranged for a revision of Greek history, primarily aiming to unify the various peoples around the Mediterranean as one family, while sharing ancient Greek ancestry. As for why they split into so many ethnic groups, he attributed it mainly to the decline of the Roman Empire, the Ottoman invasion, the power struggles among local ambitious figures, and the passage of time causing people to forget their former affiliation. In any case, ancient European history is a tangled mess, and there was no strict tradition of historical record-keeping in ancient Europe. Otto embellished it with some subtle writing, enlisted the support of Greek scholars, and who can prove it's all nonsense? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 Labor Protection. During this period, with Greece's rapid development, capitalists finally began investing in various factories. Most of these were very basic and primitive factories, which could be considered small workshops in rural areas by today's standards. Due to Greece's insufficient population, many factories moved outside of Greece, especially to the nearby Balkans, to recruit laborers. The Royal Consortium played a leading role in this, employing foreign workers in nearly half of the factories it invested in to address the labor shortage. This influx of laborers brought not only benefits but also many troubles. Taiwan Novel Network has a comprehensive collection of books you can see and read anytime. For example, the influx of people included some criminals, leading to public security problems. At the same time, conflicts between outsiders and locals were inevitable. The most common problem was labor disputes. At Otto's request, the workers recruited by the Royal Foundation were all given formal contracts, with all benefits stipulated in the contract, and the implementation was generally satisfactory. But apart from the royal conglomerates, other capitalists, true to their nature, resorted to various methods to cut wages and force workers to work long hours. Government officials were overwhelmed trying to resolve the disputes. If it weren't for the royal conglomerates' businesses controlling most of the country's factories, Greece would likely have been in chaos and rife with public discontent long ago. After receiving reports from various regions, Otto pondered for a moment, then summoned the key members of his cabinet and said, "Now everyone knows the situation reported from various regions. If the problem is allowed to continue to escalate, I'm afraid Greece will become unstable. What are the cabinet's thoughts?" With Otto's prompting, Sanos said, "The main problem in various regions now is the conflict between capitalists and workers. Some capitalists, in pursuit of profits, are excessively exploiting workers. I think legislation should be enacted to regulate the behavior of these capitalists, protect the legitimate interests of these workers, and severely punish those who violate the law after it is promulgated and implemented." "But won't this affect the enthusiasm of those capitalists to invest?" the finance minister said with some concern. "I don't think so. As far as I know, only a small number of capitalists are having problems right now. In fact, most capitalists in the country treat their workers quite well. Most of the workers employed in these capitalists' factories are satisfied with their treatment, and many foreign workers come to Greece because of these capitalists' good treatment," the Minister of Education said. "Those who really need to be dealt with are those unscrupulous capitalists who only pursue profits and don't care about the lives of their workers." Seeing that the situation was about right, Otto said, "Indeed, I've heard that many of the factories that have caused trouble are small workshops. Their owners not only excessively exploit their workers, but also try every means to evade taxes, wishing they could put all the money into their own pockets. Allowing such behavior would actually reduce the profits of legitimate capitalists by raising worker wages, putting them at a competitive disadvantage. If this leads some legitimate capitalists to follow suit, that would be a major problem. Therefore, The cabinet needs to quickly produce a draft law to encourage legitimate factories and severely punish unscrupulous ones. Seeing that Otto had set the tone, the other cabinet ministers also expressed their agreement, and the cabinet quickly reached a consensus on enacting the relevant legislation. After more than 2 months of discussion, the cabinet released a new trial version of the regulations on employment and enterprises. According to these regulations, 1. Starting May 1, 1834, Greece implemented a 12-hour workday. Workers could voluntarily choose whether to work overtime, and factory owners could not reduce workers' wages for this reason. Overtime work must be compensated in addition to wages too. Greece will determine a minimum wage standard based on local income and cost of living. Enterprises employing workers within Greece must not pay wages lower than this minimum wage standard. 3. Workers injured on the job are entitled to compensation, the amount of which varies depending on the severity of the injury. 4. The law severely punishes any unjustified withholding or delaying of wages. Once such behavior is confirmed, violators will be required to pay compensation based on 10 times the wage amount, and the Industry and Commerce departments will impose fines according to the severity of the offense. This law, Otto, to some extent referenced later regulations while also making adaptive changes based on the current situation. For example, the 12-hour workday. Currently, workers typically work 15 or 16 hours, and further reduction would significantly decrease a company's competitiveness. Another issue is the prohibition of child labor. This draft trial version also sets the age limit for child labor at 14 years old. The main issue is that in that era, in some ordinary families, children as young as 14 or 15 were already considered part of the workforce, and sometimes even had to take charge of the household. Legal provisions couldn't ignore the realities of the situation. Overall, this law leaned towards protecting workers' interests, especially in its extremely strict punishments. Otto also linked the appropriateness and timeliness of labor dispute resolution to officials' performance evaluations, thus minimizing instances of inadequate enforcement by government personnel. This law is considered by later generations to be the first law truly concerned with workers' interests. It detailed the working hours for different types of workers, and the stipulated minimum wage was roughly equivalent to the mainstream wage income in Greece at that time. If capitalists maliciously delay or withhold wages, in addition to hefty fines, they may face the confiscation of their factory. Conversely, if workers maliciously disrupt production or frame others, they will also face at least 5 years of hard labor. Otto also employed a tactic: some worker protections only apply to Greek citizens. For example, the rule against layoffs without serious fault applies only to Greek citizens, as does the minimum wage guarantee, which Greek citizens receive in full. However, foreign workers, if they speak Greek, reach 80% of the Greek citizen population. Otherwise, the figure drops to only 60%. Otto knew that capital was greedy, and once this door was opened, capitalists would likely choose not to employ native Greeks, effectively encouraging them to hire more foreign workers. However, this regulation also had a hidden purpose: to encourage these workers to actively learn Greek and acquire Greek citizenship. Greece has comprehensive regulations for acquiring citizenship. Unless one is a highly skilled professional, foreigners wishing to apply for citizenship must work in Greece for at least 3 years. This is only a prerequisite. To obtain citizenship, one must also pass relevance examinations. The exam mainly covers Greek language and some Greek history. Currently, the difficulty level is not high. Passing it grants citizenship. Only highly skilled individuals, such as engineers and university professors, might be exempt from these requirements. This law caused an uproar upon its enactment. Mainstream newspapers, at Otto's behest, naturally praised it as a sign of Greece's respect and protection for its people. However, some people went to great lengths to denigrate it, arguing that it undermined the capitalist free market. While the capitalists loudly proclaimed this view, ordinary people largely did not agree. Chapter 36: Industrial Standards. The newly introduced corporate employment regulations, also known as the labor law, are primarily aimed at curbing the rise of capitalists in Greece before they become established, thus preventing labor movements. In early 1834, with the commencement of the 5-year plan, including the 70,000-strong road-building workforce, Greece had a total of 130,000 foreign workers, and its economy developed at an extremely rapid pace. Government investment in infrastructure construction increased domestic employment and stimulated domestic demand, propelling the Greek economy onto a fast track. However, Even this only ensured growth from nothing and did not fundamentally alter Greece's lagging industrial development. Aside from the industries invested in by the Royal Consortium, most of the other factories were light industrial enterprises, many operating as small workshops with outdated technology, lacking competitiveness, and in a state of disordered development. In response, after careful consideration, Otto decided to further deepen the reforms, organizing cabinet members and economic experts to discuss whether to formulate an industrial standards document. This document would primarily regulate standards for products in various industries. For example, iron ingots from steel mills would be categorized into quality standards, and fabrics woven by textile mills would be categorized according to quality, and so on. Taiwan Novel Network is super practical. twkcan.com, you can choose any you like. There are also corresponding standards for railway track width, load-bearing capacity, etc., and standards for highway width and hardness, etc. The importance of standardization to industrialized countries is self-evident. It regulates many industries and enhances their competitiveness, a point that is clear to ordinary people in later generations. However, this era was the beginning of industrialization, and people lacked this awareness. Therefore, everyone had different opinions on the formulation of industry standards. At Otto's prompting, the Minister of Industry and Commerce, who was tasked with proposing industry standards, said, "Gentlemen, as you all know, Greece is currently a small country with a population of just over 1 million and scarce mineral resources. Although we are vigorously promoting industrial development, most of our industrial raw materials are entirely imported. Many factories suffer from outdated management, insufficient technical capabilities, poor product quality, and a lack of international competitiveness. These factories cannot export their products, they can only compete in the domestic market. Last year, our trade deficit reached a staggering 50 million drachmarks, and besides a paltry few tons of gold reserves, our already meager foreign exchange reserves are now almost depleted. If this situation continues, our economy could very well collapse. Therefore, it is essential to establish industry standards to eliminate some uncompetitive factories and give the market to competitive enterprises. But Your Majesty, this set of industry standards you have established undermines the free market capitalist system. Excessive government intervention in the market economy disrupts social fairness and will have serious consequences." The speaker was Mr. Mullen, an economist from Britain. In Britain, where free market economics is prevalent, Mullen was a staunch believer. He was also an official in the Greek Customs Service and a friend of the British ambassador to Greece. During the Greek War of Independence, Greece borrowed money from Britain, using customs duties as collateral. Otto Marin was invited by the British government to help manage Greek customs and guarantee repayment. In a sense, this was a humiliating loss of sovereignty, but Otto, upon arriving in Greece, did not intend for his position as a customs official to affect his relationship with Britain. Moreover, Greece lacked personnel to manage its customs, and the British delegation allowed Otto's staff to learn from British customs management experience. From this perspective, it was also a form of British support for the development of the Greek customs system. Does government intervention in the market economy undermine social fairness? The finance minister beside him couldn't help but laugh. Since the 5-year plan, Greece had been on a path of government intervention in the economy. Because of this, Marin had frequently criticized Greece's current policies and offered the cabinet and Otto many economic development suggestions that he considered very correct. In Marin's view, Greece's economic development was completely on the wrong track. However, many cabinet ministers, after witnessing the changes in Greece's economy, gradually gained more approval for Otto's planned economy, and some radicals even proposed the idea of complete government intervention and planned economic development. Mr. Marin, your words are alarmist. The Greek government is intervening in the market economy to ensure its healthy development and to eliminate potential threats in advance. If left unchecked, how will domestic capitalists compete with international capital? The finance minister said. It is common knowledge that without competition there is no development. Current Greek policies will only promote monopolies. The government only needs to raise tariffs to provide sufficient room for the development of national industries. After competition, companies will naturally have sufficient competitiveness, Marin insisted. But Mr. Mullen, have you considered that Greece's entire population is only 1 million? How big is a market of 1 million people? It's simply impossible to support industrial development. Therefore, our industrial development has had to rely on the international market from the very beginning. Raising tariffs will only lead to other countries raising their tariffs in return, reducing the competitiveness of our companies in the international market. What other purpose does it serve? As for improving the competitiveness of companies, can't competing with foreign companies force capitalists to innovate technologically and improve their competitiveness? Seeing that Mullen had stopped refuting and seemed to have nothing more to say, the Minister of Commerce and Industry pressed his advantage, saying, implementing industry standards may raise the bar and lead to the emergence of monopolies, which is the only path Greece can take. Given Greece's national conditions, it's impossible to industrialize by closing the door. The only way to develop is to focus all national resources on an export-oriented economy. Monopoly is indeed bad, but it's the most suitable for Greece right now, Prime Minister Sanos concluded, trying to end the debate. However, this statement unexpectedly sparked another argument. What do you mean by most suitable? It simply means it best serves the interests of certain people. Nonsense. The two sides exchanged views, arguing endlessly. Seeing that the meeting was verging off topic and the arguing was making his head spin, Otto promptly stopped the escalating argument, raising his voice slightly. All right, gentlemen, please quiet down. Everyone should be mindful of their status. We are discussing national policy, not engaging in personal attacks. This is a one-time event. The cabinet meeting is for discussing national affairs. In future meetings, anyone who engages in personal attacks will be disqualified from participating. Seeing Otto's serious expression, both sides quieted down. At the same time, Otto secretly thought how fortunate he was to have dissolved the National Assembly as soon as he took office, otherwise, he couldn't have endured this kind of thing every day. Chapter 37 Rest Time. After learning that the cabinet was about to set industry standards, many capitalists in various industries realized the problem and naturally resorted to all sorts of methods. They bribed experts and scholars, manipulated public opinion and newspapers, and spent lavishly on government lobbying in an attempt to lower the standards. They used every means at their disposal to try and persuade the government to reduce the stipulated industrial standards, or even abandon the standard-setting process altogether, to reduce potential costs and ensure profits. However, the Greek government was clearly determined to push forward with this policy. Soon after the new industrial standards were finalized and published in Greece, many factories were forced to close, creating a scene of widespread despair. But Otto remained unmoved. He knew this was the only way forward, beneficial to the healthy development of Greek industry, and even crucial to people's livelihoods. Especially now, with Greek industry still in its infancy, reform faced the least resistance and incurred the least loss. Otherwise, once domestic industry had developed, reforms would require a much greater sacrifice. For example, in the food industry, to ensure Greece's food supply, Otto not only vigorously developed large-scale farms but also invested in numerous food processing plants. Besides the common primary processing of grains, these included brewing, salt processing, biscuit making, sausage production, canning, and more. Although they couldn't yet produce the various snacks of later generations, Otto discovered that this type of low-barrier-to-entry industry had unexpectedly high profit margins in this era, indicating a promising future. He also found that Greece lacked grain-producing areas, and with the increase in foreign laborers, the demand for food was rising, leading to significant investment in the food processing industry. However, some of the refined products had relatively short shelf lives, mainly due to the inadequate preservative technology of the time, which also contained some toxicity. Excessive use could be fatal. Following Otto's instructions, the Royal Consortium was extremely cautious about adding chemicals, as the target customers for those high-end products were wealthy individuals and nobles. As for low-end products, Otto, being a shrewd capitalist, naturally prioritized profit maximization, opting for the cheapest possible price. The cheaper the product, the less guaranteed the quality. In this respect, he was in line with international standards, perhaps being slightly cautious to ensure no one was poisoned. Other aspects were outside Otto's considerations. However, many capitalists lack even this awareness, adding highly toxic preservatives, such as mercury compounds, with predictable consequences. Regarding monopoly capitalism, because Britain practiced free market economics and was the most powerful nation, economists like Mullen naturally championed free market economics. But on the other hand, monopolies also include factors that promote technological development. When a country's domestic market is large enough, it becomes saturated, hindering technological development and management improvement. This can cause companies to remain in their comfort zones, as many examples have demonstrated. However, for a small country like Greece, development still relies on an export-oriented economy. Under monopolistic capitalism, a domestic market monopoly secures a certain core market share before expanding outwards. To compete with foreign companies, this naturally leads to efforts to enhance competitiveness and improve technological levels. As the country expands and develops, technology and labor quality improve, production and accumulation scale increase, and the social integration of the production process continues to advance. Monopolistic enterprises will inevitably develop various corporate problems. However, all of this is predicated on Greece's future expansion. Promoting monopolies at this stage is necessary. At worst, policy shifts can be implemented later, and there are many other methods. After resolving the issue of domestic industrial standardization, Otto lay comfortably on Natasha's lap in the somewhat shabby royal palace. Natasha Fabinjek was Otto's tutor, chosen by Queen Teresa before he left Bavaria to become King of Greece. She was primarily responsible for teaching him Russian and was of Polish nobility. The Polish uprising of 1830 had a significant impact on Eastern Europe. Pro-independence Polish troops and armed civilians immediately occupied the Berwital Palace, the official residence of Archduke Constantine, Governor-General of Russia and Poland, and quickly seized the armory and important government buildings, distributing tens of thousands of rifles to the citizens. Almost overnight, they occupied the entire city of Warsaw. Archduke Constantine was quick-witted. Realizing something was amiss, he fled immediately. The insurgents established a provisional government, with Polish General Józef Chwałopicki as commander-in-chief. The uprising quickly swept across Poland. However, the Polish elite understood Russia's power, and those including Commander-in-Chief Józef Chwałopicki hoped to negotiate with Russia to secure some conditions for independence and end the uprising with dignity. But the ever-powerful Tsar Nicholas I had no intention of easily letting these rebels go. He urgently mobilized his troops while ordering the Polish people to surrender unconditionally. Negotiations between the two sides quickly broke down, and with peace seemingly hopeless, the newly formed Polish parliament, under pressure from the revolutionary masses, publicly announced the deposition of Nicholas I and formal independence from Russia. This further enraged Nicholas I, and under his orders, Russian troops entered Polish territory to quell the rebellion. Initially, due to the vastness of Russian territory, an outdated military system, and a lack of preparedness among the troops after a long period of peace, the Russian army, despite its superior numbers and weaponry, suffered repeated setbacks against the resolute resistance of the Polish insurgents. In the Battle of Koshin in April 1831, the Polish insurgents decisively defeated the Russian vanguard, inflicting thousands of casualties on the Russian suppression forces, a truly shocking defeat. Enraged by this humiliation, Nicholas I amassed even more troops and launched a large-scale massacre and reprisal in Poland, sparing even the Polish nobility and upper classes. Large numbers of Polish insurgents were slaughtered and exiled. Under the bloody suppression by Russia, the insurgents were quickly crushed, leaving behind countless blood debts for the Russian army. The assets of many Polish nobles were confiscated, forcing them to flee. Natasha's family was also involved in the Polish uprising. But her situation was better. Due to her noble status, she fled to Germany to seek refuge with relatives there. However, her family lost its lands and income, so Natasha had to find a way to apply for a job at the Bavarian royal palace, where she was chosen by Queen Teresa to be Otto's tutor. Natasha felt she wasn't very competent in her teaching job and didn't deserve the high salary she received. Because Otto learned everything quickly, even Russian, which he now spoke quite well and could even write letters in Russian, her main job was to read the newspaper to Otto when he had free time, a time for him to relax. The only problem, of course, was that Otto liked to lie on her lap, making her somewhat uncomfortable while reading the newspaper. At this moment, Otto was oblivious to Natasha's feelings, lost in thought as he lay on the young Polish girl's lap. He had just signed a new tariff agreement between Greece and Austria, making it easier for Greece to import grain and minerals from Austria, reducing its complete reliance on Russia, and opening up the Austrian textile market. The newly established German customs union rejected Greece's request to join, for the simple reason that Greece was not part of traditional German territory. Otto believes that Austria's most crucial failure in unifying the German region stemmed from its exclusion from the German customs union, a coalition of Prussian states. Through this union, the Kingdom of Prussia had already economically unified the German regions before unifying all of Germany except Austria. This economic influence over many years, coupled with the impact of several wars and a suitable foreign policy, propelled the Kingdom of Prussia into the German Empire. Austria possessed a political and cultural advantage in unifying the German regions, and many of the German states at that time preferred to align themselves with Austria. However, as Greece was excluded from the customs union, this advantage was gradually diminished by the Kingdom of Prussia. Otto's desire to bring Greece into the German customs union was also an attempt to penetrate the German market, but he was unsuccessful. At the same time, Otto learned from Ludwig I that Greece's failure to join the German customs union was due to strong opposition from the Kingdom of Prussia. It seemed that the Kingdom of Prussia was also worried that Bavaria, with the help of Greece, would compete with them for dominance in the customs union, especially since Otto, the King of Greece, was Ludwig I's most favored son. Otto pondered for a long time, but couldn't think of a way to help his father and the Kingdom of Prussia fight for the German territories. The best-case scenario was to partition the German territories together with Prussia, but that wouldn't be enough to support a large country. After thinking about this for a while, Otto was brought back to his senses by a new message that Natasha had read. Chapter 38: A Long and Arduous Journey. The news report was about the United States, stating that land prices had reached a record high. From 1830 to the present, in just 4 years, land prices in the Chicago area had tripled. And judging by the trend, land prices were still rising. Austrian economists predicted that land prices would double again within 3 years. This news awakened Otto's memories. In his previous life, he had seen a report that from 1834 to 1837, Chicago land prices had skyrocketed 64 times. Such unnatural growth must have been driven by speculation, and then the United States experienced the economic crisis of 1837. Like other economic crises, after the bubble burst, land returned to its original value. Land that could sell for $12,000 at its peak could only be listed for $100 in 1839. This economic crisis, which occurred in the United States, had little impact on continental Europe, which generally practiced trade protection policies. The only countries affected were the United States and Britain, because their economic ties had become extremely close by then. Thinking this, Otto sat up abruptly, ignoring the startled Natasha, grabbed the newspaper with the news report, read it carefully, and then said to the person beside him, "Go and summon Butler West. Tell him I have something important to instruct him on." After giving the order, Otto felt somewhat relieved. If it weren't for this report, he would have missed an important speculative opportunity. It just goes to show that even reborn individuals aren't omnipotent and can't consider everything comprehensively. This Austrian newspaper didn't have much space for news from the United States. It focused more on reports of rebel groups in various regions. In the past year, a total of 12 uprisings had occurred in Austria and its surrounding areas. All 3 recent uprisings have been suppressed. One was small-scale, another was prevented by the garrison's prior precautions, with Austria deploying its most capable generals to the most likely locations for revolts. Only the Genoa uprising involved the largest number of people and lasted the longest. Otto even recognized 2 familiar names on the list, Giuseppe Mazzini and Giuseppe Garibaldi. The general Austria sent to suppress the uprising was none other than General Ricci, a notorious surrenderer from the Napoleonic Wars era. This Austrian General Ricci was even jokingly referred to as the French's moneybag, having been captured 11 times by the French army and their allies, each time returning to Austria only with ransom from his family. This man, however, was wealthy, of good birth, and held a high position in Austria. So, despite being captured by the French time and again, he wasn't demoted. Instead, he rose through the ranks to a high position. As the governor of Venice, with 20,000 troops stationed there, he ordered his soldiers to surrender their weapons and leave the city, retaining only their flags, when faced with a disorganized rebellion. This action indirectly led to the downfall of the Austrian navy. At the time, the Austrian admiral had died unexpectedly, and the newly appointed admiral hadn't yet received orders to take office. Without a commander, most of the Austrian navy's officers and men scattered like birds. An unnamed captain with fewer than 100 sailors fought the rebels for 5 days before being killed in action. This led to the farcical scene where the Genoese rebels, with 7 warships, besieged the Austrian naval port of Lillestrøm. More importantly, after Austria mobilized its forces to quell the uprising, General Ricci not only escaped punishment but was also given command of the Bohemian front in northern Austria. Seeing this incompetent man's actions, and recalling the intelligence he had gathered about the Ottoman Empire, Otto suddenly felt an urge to lead the Greek army to overthrow the Ottoman Empire. Even the mastermind behind the Genoese uprising successfully escaped to Switzerland in Marzini and then sailed across the ocean to England to seek opportunities. Otto was more interested in one of the gunmen who participated in the uprising, Garibaldi, who was not yet famous, but would later stir up a series of upheavals. This guy escaped on a merchant ship, traveled to South America, participated in Uruguay's independence war, and made great contributions. Garibaldi, who had achieved fame and success, was comfortably enjoying his hero status when a major political change occurred in Uruguay. He was forced to return to the Apennine Peninsula, find employment in Italy, and successfully make his mark on history, becoming an Italian hero. Putting down the newspaper, Otto went to a wall in the living room where the latest world map hung. Central America, South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and the then barren Australia, all were territories ripe for expansion. However, Greece was currently far too weak. Even with the idea, it lacked the capability. Then Natasha saw Otto begin sketching on the map, speaking in a language Natasha couldn't understand. It is said that the affairs of the world, after a long period of unity, tend to divide, after a long period of division, tend to unite. A time of great strife. Otto muttered, lost in thought. Natasha recognized the language as Chinese. One phrase sounded very familiar, one she had heard Otto say several times before, though she didn't understand its meaning. This made her think that perhaps she should learn the language of the Far Eastern Empire. It's unclear what Natasha was thinking, but Otto was contemplating the situations of various countries, primarily concerning industry and the military. Greece had just completed 190 kilometers of railway, while Austria had 30 kilometers, Prussia 6 kilometers, France 150 kilometers, and Britain 600 kilometers, approximately 965 kilometers. However, countries recognizing the importance of railways were implementing their own plans. The French government had already announced a 730-kilometer railway construction plan, and I believe that by 1848, the total length of French railways would increase to 1,814 kilometers. However, this was much more conservative compared to the German states. The combined railway plans of all the countries in the German region, excluding Austria, reached a staggering 6,000 kilometers. Britain even approved a 6,000-mile, approximately 8,047 km, railway construction plan, which would have resulted in 15,357 miles, approximately 24,714 km, of railway by 1870, creating the densest railway network in the world at the time. Russia, on the other hand, had not yet realized the importance of railways, approving only a few easy-to-build lines totaling about 200 kilometers. As far as I remember, even in 1866, Russia's railway network was a paltry 1,488 kilometers. At this time, the Americans had only built 2,000 kilometers of railroads, but by 1850 they would have 9,021 kilometers. Due to financial reasons, Austria only approved an initial railroad construction plan of 350 kilometers, and didn't have 1,200 kilometers of railroads until 1848. The United States now produced 85% of the world's cotton, which led Britain, with its highly developed textile industry, to begin looking for new cotton-producing regions. They were communicating with Egypt while also planning to cultivate cotton in India. At this time, excluding water-powered looms, Britain had over 7,000 steam looms, while Greece only had 80 in its textile mill invested in by Otto, and even including other companies, it had just over 100 looms. Fortunately, Otto successfully acquired the technology for steam looms and was able to independently produce the most advanced steam looms, which he could use himself and sell to increase Greece's revenue. As for the number of army personnel, Austria had 450,000, France 500,000, Prussia 200,000, Russia 600,000, while Greece had a pitiful less than 10,000. The Austrian army possessed the most artillery pieces in all of Europe, with approximately 1,300, followed by the Russians with about 900, the French with only 800, Prussia with fewer than 600, and the British Army on the mainland, due to consistent government neglect, with only 300. The Greek army had a paltry 23 artillery pieces, mostly small ones. As for the navy, despite having British constructors, due to various factors, It was likely inferior to the Ottoman Empire's navy, which was still undergoing difficult reconstruction. As for the British, there was no need to compare. At this time, the combined navies of all European nations probably couldn't match the British. The large British steamships Asnana and Atlantic were under construction, and they would later become the vanguard of British maritime conquest. Otto had invested in a shipyard in Greece, which could only barely build some merchant ships and fishing boats at present, while new steam warships were still under development. The only slight consolation for Otto was that Greek pig iron production had increased from virtually nothing to 30,000 tons thanks to the investment in steel mills. This amount was less than a third of Prussia's and a tenth of France's, barely enough to supply domestic railway construction and daily use in Greece, and even when there was additional demand, imports were necessary. Meeting domestic Greek demand would only be possible after the steel mills increased production. At this moment, Otto could only sigh in his heart that he, as king, truly had a long and arduous road ahead. Chapter 39 Investment Plan. In the gardens of the royal palace in Nafplio, a gentle breeze carried the fresh scent of earth. Otto sat at a makeshift round table, watching his butler, Vester, down his glass of wine. Greece has a long tradition of grape cultivation, and with the agricultural company's vigorous development of the wine industry, this year the Royal Consortium exported 3,000 barrels of Athens wine to various parts of Europe through department stores. Thus, it seemed that Vester, the head butler, was also inextricably linked to wine. "I have an investment plan in mind," Otto asked at this moment. "How much spare capital does the Royal Consortium currently have at its disposal?" "A new investment plan?" Vester immediately perked up. Past experience shows that Otto had a keen eye for investment. Apart from his investment in Greek heavy industry, which was necessary for national development, all his other business ventures were highly profitable. West pondered for a moment and said, "Currently, without affecting development, the Royal Institution can probably allocate £1,000,000. I wonder where your Majesty plans to invest?" £1,000,000? Otto thought for a moment upon hearing this number. "That's enough. Assign a sufficiently loyal and suitable person to go to America to buy land, any kind of land, but sell it all before Christmas 1836. Is it that simple?" West was slightly taken aback. Many of his subordinates were suitable for such a simple task, but Otto had specifically emphasized loyalty, so West began to consider it carefully. "I recommend Mr. Damiluk to handle this investment. His family has worked for the Bavarian royal family for many years, and his family members are currently working for the Bavarian or Greek royal families as well. Mr. Damiluk is very good with numbers, extremely meticulous in his work, and an exceptionally capable accountant. He has handled all his previous projects with remarkable competence." West recommended a candidate, then hesitated before continuing, "Regarding real estate intelligence in the United States, our personnel there do indeed send over intelligence. However, America is a wild and undeveloped place, and the credibility of those savages is questionable. With land prices rising so rapidly there, problems are bound to arise sooner or later. At that time, Europeans viewed Americans as barbarians, and mainstream economists believe that the rapid rise in American land prices would cause problems, but because free market economics was popular, no one tried to stop it. I naturally know that the American real estate industry will run into problems sooner or later, but this is inherently a speculative venture, which is why I requested a sale within 3 years, Otto said. Of course, during this process, you must keep a close eye on relevant information. Also, instruct the person in charge of the Royal Consortium in North America to cooperate as much as possible with Damiruk's work and buy as many prime plots of land as possible. Success would be ideal, but even if it fails, it won't have a significant impact on the Royal Consortium. Have Damiruk come to see me later. I will arrange for someone else to accompany him to America." "I understand, Your Majesty," West nodded. "I will arrange it." Watching West's butler leave, Otto couldn't help but feel excited. If everything unfolded according to history, this $1,000,000 investment would multiply tenfold in the next 3 years. Although Otto knew that due to various reasons, the actual profit might not reach that figure, it was still an amount that would tempt any country. With this money, not only could the royal conglomerate greatly expand its businesses, but he himself would also have sufficient capital to carry out many things he had long planned in his mind. Thinking of this, Otto felt that such a matter could not be entirely entrusted to one person, and that testing human nature with such a huge profit would be inappropriate. Therefore, He quickly thought of several candidates and planned to divide the £1 million into 5 small groups, each with its own responsibilities, while also arranging several different groups of people to secretly keep an eye on things, lest anyone become envious and abscond with his money. At that time, Chicago was just a desolate little town. Damilok, carrying Otto's mission, came and immediately spent $150,000 to buy the best house in the town's prime location and the surrounding wasteland. As a result, Damilok unwittingly became the town's mayor, much to his amusement and dismay. Otto, upon hearing the news, was initially surprised but then found it perfectly natural, because it was so American. Following this, Damilok and his companions began busily working in America. Their figures frequently appeared in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and other places, waving banknotes and buying land on a large scale. Related news began to spread, with rumors circulating that European aristocrats were optimistic about America's development, believing land prices would rise, and were thus buying land in large quantities. This was actually the effect Otto wanted. These rumors even implicated royal financial groups. In fact, almost all bankers in the United States knew that land prices were rising too quickly, but most of them were also optimistic about the American land market. What happened next was exactly as Otto had predicted. As the news spread, Americans also began to pay attention to their land holdings and were no longer easily selling them. The more reluctant these Americans were to sell, the faster land prices rose, creating a surge in land prices and drawing more attention to American land prices. This trend slowly spread from the United States to Europe, attracting many capitalists. The U.S. government was also fueling this trend, implementing policies to attract foreign investment and issuing large amounts of paper money during the economic boom. In the early 19th century, the U.S. federal government did not have its own central bank, and therefore did not issue paper money. The federal government's money supply was limited to various coins, while paper money consisted of banknotes issued by thousands of state-approved banks. The banks in these states varied greatly in quality, with some even established by con artists and speculators. At this time, the functions of the Federal Reserve were being performed by the Second Bank of the United States. However, the bankers at this bank, believing in so-called free market economics, frantically issued paper money, causing the total amount of paper currency to increase by nearly 50% in just 2 years. Once this hot money entered the banks, they began to loosen their grip, especially on land-backed loans, issuing massive amounts of loans with a green light. Capitalists speculating on land seized the opportunity, mortgaging their land to banks for loans and using the borrowed money to buy even more land. As a result, land prices naturally skyrocketed. While the inflow of precious metals into the United States had indeed increased, the amount of paper money issued far exceeded the U.S.'s redemption capacity. Beneath the surface of apparent prosperity, the first economic crisis was quietly brewing in the United States. Chapter 40: Freedom and the Army. That damned Andrew Jackson is a short-sighted bastard. What does a gun-wielding bandit know about economics? We must print more money to attract more Europeans to invest. Then, faced with a huge fiscal surplus, let's see what that bandit can say. This was the order given by the President of the Second Bank of the United States, Beater, at an internal bank meeting. The person he was calling a bandit was none other than Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States. Realizing that the Second Bank of the United States was issuing banknotes on a scale far exceeding the United States' own precious metal reserves, Andrew Jackson privately told Vice President Martin Van Buren, "That damned bank is trying to kill me in America, but I'll take it down first." Andrew Jackson, a former soldier known for plundering Native American lands, was considered by some to be a veritable bandit. He refused to extend the Second Bank of the United States federal charter and planned to shut it down. Cutting off someone's livelihood is akin to murdering their parents. Beater harbored deep hatred for the U.S. president, unabashedly calling him a bandit. The president's judgment was correct. Because of the Second Bank of the United States' actions, the U.S. economy was spiraling out of control, and this was only the beginning of its demise. With the Second Bank of the United States increasing its issuance of paper money, over 30 million acres of land were sold this year, significantly easing the U.S.'s debt burden. If this trend continues, the U.S. will also see a huge fiscal surplus, and Beater believes that the bandit president he's talking about will only be able to apologize for what he said. Thinking this, Beater leisurely lit a cigar, glanced at the latest newspaper article, and said smugly, "Now is the most profitable time to invest. I wouldn't even be able to collect my commission without a 100% profit." "You're right," a bank manager beside him chimed in. "The land you ordered to be purchased in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, doubled in value in just 1 week. That president who still refuses to change his mind will surely admit in the future that you, sir, are the pride of America." Ha ha ha, that's right, this is freedom. Yes, long live freedom. Long live freedom. The power struggle between American bankers and the president was largely irrelevant to Otto, who was currently at a newly built arsenal, watching the test firing of newly cast artillery. The issue raised earlier by War Secretary General Corinth served as a wake-up call. Previously, Otto had always believed that the Navy was a technical branch, requiring years of training to maintain combat effectiveness when needed. The Army, on the other hand, only required a sufficient number of qualified officers and several months of preemptive training to achieve initial combat capability. Therefore, Otto initially purchased 3 of the latest steam-powered warships from Britain, and quickly added 3 more, to train the Navy and ensure mastery of the latest warship operating techniques. For the Army, Otto intensified the training and assessment of officers to ensure a sufficient number of qualified officers when a large-scale army was needed. This method, ensuring that military spending did not negatively impact economic development, was Otto's most suitable way to guarantee the combat effectiveness of the Greek army while saving money. General Corinth's reminder made him realize that artillery in this era also required a great deal of experience and technical skill. In particular, artillery officers were required to have a certain level of mathematical and physical knowledge in areas such as geodesy, orientation, cartography, and ammunition production. Hastily trained artillery could not guarantee their proper role in war. Artillery is known as the god of war, and Otto, the reborn being, suffers from a fear of insufficient firepower, so he made some minor adjustments to the army's deployment. Although the arsenal had not yet developed the latest rifled cannon technology as he requested, he still ordered them to cast a batch of new 12-pounder, 8-pounder, and 4-pounder cannons, along with matching gun carriages, fore and aft carriages, and ammunition carriages. In reality, rifled and smoothbore cannons each have their advantages and disadvantages. Rifle cannons have high accuracy and long range. Because the bullet band and rifling are tightly sealed, it prevents the leakage of propellant gases, thus ensuring that the propellant gases have sufficient thrust on the bullet, increasing the range and the concentration of fire, which is beneficial for forming artillery clusters. However, due to its relatively low muzzle velocity, the smoothbore cannon had less power. Furthermore, the rifling accelerated barrel wear, resulting in a much shorter service life compared to smoothbore cannons. In contrast, smoothbore cannons had a higher muzzle velocity and correspondingly greater power, along with a longer barrel life. This characteristic led later tanks to favor smoothbore cannons. This batch of newly cast artillery was intended for training artillerymen and also allowed the arsenal to accumulate more experience in cannon manufacturing. Otto also ordered the Guards to form 3 new independent artillery regiments, coupled with 3 engineer companies and 5 maintenance companies, improving the artillerymen's treatment and increasing their training. As a result, the size of the artillery even surpassed that of other army units. Even so, Otto plans to further expand the artillery in the future, increasing the training of artillery officers and strengthening artillerymen training to ensure that the Greek army will have a sufficient number of skilled artillerymen and officers after its expansion. Currently, the Greek military offers very good benefits. To ensure soldiers' sense of belonging and combat effectiveness, although the Greek army is not large, soldiers' income ranks among the highest in the country. Military management and promotion rules are transparent, and even soldiers have the opportunity to study and take exams to enter military academies for further training and then become officers. In the military, positions were assigned one by one, but as long as one obtained the corresponding rank and position, one could obtain the corresponding benefits. As for the problem of an overabundance of officers in the Greek army, Otto assigned some of the ordinary army officers to agricultural companies' farms across the country to train farm workers. This not only solved the problem of where to place the ever-increasing number of officers and ensured the effectiveness of the farm worker training, but also strengthened his control over farms in various regions. The army is the nation's strongest shield and the most important guarantee for Greece's future expansion. Therefore, although Greece currently focuses on economic development and has a relatively small army, Otto paid close attention to military issues from the very beginning. As early as February 18, 1833, Otto ordered the establishment of the Army Regulations and Reform Committee, and hired talent from France, Austria, and Prussia to reform the army's composition, size, logistics, recruitment, training, and tactics. Europe, due to its frequent wars, has a deep understanding of military affairs, and there are considerable theoretical bases and practical results for these reforms. In Europe at that time, it was common practice for nobles to occupy all the high-ranking positions in the military. These aristocratic officers were heavily influenced by feudal aristocracy, and most of them never lived in the barracks. Even when they were in the barracks, they often carried a large amount of luggage and servants, placing a heavy and unnecessary burden on the army. In contrast, ordinary soldiers had no way to rise in rank, and civilians in many countries had no chance of advancement in the military. This actually had a significant impact on the army's combat effectiveness. In present-day Greece, because Otto had purged most of the previously powerful and influential people, the newly formed army, built according to modern principles Otto knew and adapted to the realities of the situation, did not have these problems. Otto even encouraged soldiers to study and become mid to high-ranking officers. Strict military regulations were well enforced within the army. Except for holidays, both officers and soldiers had various training and learning programs. At the same time, through public reporting and organizing regular visits for students in schools, the army aimed to improve the general public's stereotypical impression of the military and enhance their sense of honor. Therefore, Otto still has high hopes for the future of the Greek army. As for the lack of combat experience, at this stage, it can only be made up for by more training and more confrontation exercises. Chapter 41 Local Inspections. While Otto was infiltrating the Balkans using a modified rural-to-urban strategy, Russia was also active. They sent Pan-Slavists into the Ottoman Empire to infiltrate and spread Pan-Slavic ideology. Russia's Pan-Slavism was highly targeted diplomatically, primarily aimed at the Balkans and the Black Sea coast. Clearly, it was intended to expand Russia's influence in these regions and consolidate its position in Slavic-populated areas. The Ottomans were highly wary of this, and despite previous agreements with Russia, they maintained a policy of covert resistance to hinder these individuals' activities. Due to the prevailing mindset of the time, these Pan-Slavists operated primarily in cities, drawing the majority of the Ottomans' attention. This, in turn, caused the Ottomans to further overlook the large-scale farms established by agricultural companies in local villages. These large farms recruited local farmers with remarkably generous compensation packages in an era when large landowners treated people poorly, attracting a large number of locals to join. The Greek teachers and missionaries assigned to these farms taught the farmers Greek language and culture, and promoted Hellenism. The officers on the farms provided them with basic military training using rudimentary equipment such as second-hand rifles provided by Otto. After gaining a deeper understanding of this era, Otto also clearly recognized that while nationalism would rise in many nations in the future, it was currently only spreading among the aristocracy and intellectuals, and had not yet spread widely to the common people. Ordinary farmers were largely illiterate and basically believed whatever the learned nobles or scholars said. Otto, as a reborn individual, astutely grasped this point, initially targeting the assimilation of the vast majority of the population, the ordinary farmers. Continuing this process, as long as these people identified as Greek, no matter how loudly the nationalists proclaimed it, they couldn't change the fact that the majority of the local population had already become Greek. As for the method of funding local scholars commonly used in many countries at that time, Otto also invested in this area, but comparatively, not to a large extent. It can be said that agricultural companies occupied a very important position in Otto's future plans, which gave him the idea of inspecting farms throughout Greece. Since becoming king, Otto has been constantly busy with various affairs. The 5-year plan was a completely new model in this era, and the entire Greek government, from top to bottom, had little experience with it. Even Otto, who had seen things go wrong before, had no choice but to step in and work alongside the cabinet, while also handling numerous affairs of the royal consortium. Fortunately, the most challenging projects, the railway and highway projects, and the industrial development plan that Otto valued most, had made several minor mistakes, but so far, no major problems had arisen. Now that Greece's 5-year plan was on track, Otto's free time gradually increased. However, Otto also keenly observed numerous corrupt officials within the government. Recently, through internal government audits and his spies across the country, many officials found guilty of corruption or embezzlement were brought to justice. As for agriculture, due to the presence of agricultural companies, the government's involvement was largely superficial, with officials not particularly dedicated to their work. Otto knew this was an inherent characteristic of bureaucratic thinking. With agricultural companies involved, the agricultural sector was arguably the most relaxed department in the entire Greek government. Meanwhile, the rapid development of industry and commerce, and the impressive results of the previous year, had also led to complacency among some officials. Otto didn't know how to change this situation in the short term. During his inspection tour, in addition to visiting farms and plantations throughout the region, he would also visit rural areas. In the original timeline, post-revolutionary Russia faced the problem of neglecting agriculture during its first 5-year plan. It wasn't until 1929, when Otto the Great personally inspected rural areas and supervised the work, that agricultural collectivization in Russia fully commenced. Within just 2 months of the revolution, 10 million farming households joined collectivization, representing half of the country's total. Although numerous problems arose, Russia's agricultural reforms were generally successful. Of course, Otto only hoped that these bureaucrats would pay more attention to agricultural issues. Agricultural companies couldn't possibly address every aspect. Greece still had some independent farmers, and even in some rural areas, farmers had cultivated their own land. Some scattered plots of land were unsuitable for large farms, so Otto didn't stop them. Instead, he encouraged farmers to cultivate them voluntarily, hoping his actions would spur the bureaucrats to take action. In February 1834, Otto set off from Nafplio for a 3-month tour of the country. Because Greece was relatively small, 3 months was ample time for him to gain a deep understanding of all aspects of the nation. Otto's sudden arrival certainly caught many bureaucrats off guard. In many places, only 2 or 3 days had passed between receiving the notification and Otto's arrival, leaving them with virtually no time to prepare. Of course, Otto's tour wasn't specifically to pick a fight with these people. Wherever he went, he inspected factories and personally visited rural areas, directly raising any problems he encountered and demanding solutions from local governments. Otto had seen plenty of bureaucrats in his life and online. Without pressure, there is no motivation, and catering to the political demands of superiors was their primary driving force. Through his tours and deeper understanding of various places, Otto made some minor adjustments to future plans, jotting down many notes in his notebook. As this tour progressed, he also understood why, even in the internet age, so many leaders still need to conduct inspections everywhere. What can you gain from such a superficial look? How much truth is there in what those chosen people say? How effective is this whole thing? Isn't it better to stay in the office? What's the point of all this showmanship? These were his thoughts as an ordinary citizen in his previous life, but now, as the ruler, he realized that even superficial showmanship was necessary, at least to put enough pressure on those below. Otto didn't stay long in any of his places, but after this tour, besides discovering many minor problems, the biggest issue he noticed was that food prices in Greece were rising rather quickly. This is relatively easy to understand. Greece itself lacks arable land suitable for growing food. Considering all factors, agricultural companies cannot possibly cultivate food on a large scale in mountainous areas. Not only would yields be low, but they would essentially lose money. The development of arable land suitable for food cultivation in the Thessalonians region has only barely solved the food problem for some of the original Greek population. However, with Greece's large-scale industrial investment, the food problem has once again become prominent. According to Greek government statistics, the number of domestic workers in Greece has increased in the new year. To date, the total number of foreign workers in Greece has exceeded 150,000. With more than 80,000 joining the ever-expanding road construction workforce. Greece is mostly mountainous, making road construction extremely difficult. Aside from a few roads in the plains, the rest are the toughest challenges. Greece's road construction plan progresses from easy to difficult, naturally requiring more and more labor in these areas. Nearly half of the remaining workers entered the various factories invested in by Otto, while other capitalists investing in factories in Greece continue to recruit. Previously, thanks to the efforts of agricultural companies, Greece's domestic food production was barely enough to feed its approximately 1 million people. However, with the increase in the immigrant population, the food supply, which was already barely enough, became scarce. Even though the economic agreements signed between Greece and Austria and Russia included provisions for food imports, food prices remained in a relatively high range. In response to this problem, Otto quickly issued instructions. Besides increasing grain imports from Russia and Austria, there is still considerable untapped potential in the Thessalonians. There are also small plots of land suitable for grain cultivation in various regions, mostly in the hands of relatively wealthy farmers, but the farming techniques are still quite primitive, and yields are low. The agricultural sector should strengthen its support for grain cultivation in various regions, sending agricultural experts to the areas to impart advanced planting experience, and providing farmers with convenient services. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42 Steel Factory. Besides agriculture, Otto was most concerned about the development of industry during this inspection. Greece's only steel plant only started production in the second half of last year. It is foreseeable that this steel plant will struggle to make a profit for a long time to come. Ideally, such major projects concerning the national economy and people's livelihood should be undertaken by the government itself. However, the current Greek government is short of funds. It owes Britain a large sum of money during the War of Independence, and Otto has been engaged in large-scale construction since becoming king. Even though he amassed wealth through confiscation of property and the expansion of tax collection has significantly increased government revenue, the government has already exhausted its resources on road construction and education. As king, Otto has no choice but to take charge himself. Otto was extremely cautious about building the steel plant. His past life as a citizen of the Far Eastern Empire had taught him the lesson of Zengzheiden's steel plant construction, a lesson written in his history textbooks. In 1890, Zengzheiden sent engineers to Day to investigate, where they discovered a large open-pit iron mine and began preparations for the Hanyang steel plant. Lacking professional knowledge, Zengzheiden completely ignored the engineer's suggestion that to build a steel plant, one must first test the quality of the iron ore and coal to determine what type of steel to smelt. He rushed into construction, purchasing equipment modeled after British steel plants and placing the factory in Hanyang. As a result, the transportation distance for raw materials increased significantly, leading to a substantial rise in costs. This directly caused the Hanyang steel plant to lose its competitiveness, and Asia's leading steel plant was thus ruined. Many people in later generations know some key points for building a steel plant. It must be as close as possible to raw material sources, with sufficient iron ore and coal, ample water sources nearby, preferably near a river, and convenient transportation. It must also conserve land, avoiding the occupation of arable land and not being built in areas prone to natural disasters such as earthquake fault zones. For some of these points, suitable locations simply could not be found in Greece, with the most crucial being the availability of raw material sources. Because of this, without Otto's investment and the government's investment, no capitalist would have been willing to build a steel plant in Greece. Otto's newly established steel plant has already begun supplying rails for domestic railway construction, significantly reducing construction costs. Otto now plans to expand the plant, aiming to make it a large-scale steel mill with an annual production capacity of 100,000 tons of iron and 45,000 tons of steel within 3 years. This will meet Greece's growing steel demand and even allow for some exports to generate revenue. If the plan is completed, this single steel plant will rank among the top 10 in the world in terms of production capacity. The cabinet felt Otto was taking too big a step, and most people were opposed to it, believing it was destined to lose money. However, they didn't say anything. After all, it was the king's own property, and what did it matter to them if Otto was spending money recklessly? Otto didn't like spending money on balls and buying jewelry and luxury goods for women. He preferred spending it on industry. At least Greece could enjoy the benefits. As for whether it could be achieved, Otto specifically consulted relevant British experts, who could confidently say it was no problem. At that time, Britain was the world's leading country in the steel industry, and Otto's steel mill employed British engineers and used British technology and equipment. Entering the steel mill by horse-drawn carriage, the most striking sight was the towering chimneys belching black smoke, and the brown factory buildings entirely constructed of steel pipes. Led by the person in charge, Otto, with a small entourage, entered the smelting workshop. The spacious workshop was filled with an intensely hot atmosphere. Under the workers' operation, orange-red molten steel poured out, sparks flying. Looking at the scene before him, Otto asked, Can the steel mill produce seamless steel pipes of sufficient strength now? Currently, the most common use of seamless steel pipes is in firearms production. When a firearm fires, the internal chamber pressure is extremely high, and to avoid the risk of a barrel explosion, seamless steel pipes cast in one piece must be used. Currently, all of the steel mill's production capacity is tilted towards rail production. Otto's question about whether the steel mill could produce seamless steel pipes was actually preparation for the complete domestic production of military equipment in the future. Your Majesty, the steel mill is fully equipped. Producing seamless steel pipes is a piece of cake, the British engineer beside him replied. Otto was pleased with this answer. Currently, because the army was relatively small and the steel mill's production capacity was largely focused on rails, the main materials for the military factory were imported. However, Otto considered it important that Greece could handle as many aspects of military production as possible in the future. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that, in addition to the Greek army, the firearms produced by the military factory were also being shipped in large quantities to agricultural companies and farms throughout the country, the military factory would be a losing business. The reason is simple: even though Otto had just expanded the artillery, the entire Greek army numbered only slightly over 10,000, and could only procure a maximum of 10 to 20,000 rifles, with even fewer artillery pieces. The profits from these purchases might not even cover the cost of the machinery, let alone break even. In peacetime, a rifle, with maintenance and barrel replacements, can last for 10 years without problems. However, machine tools in military factories rust and rot when idle. Without orders to keep the machines running, they become obsolete over time. Even other countries typically purchase weapons from large, powerful nations, not from small, insignificant countries like Greece. Small countries are unlike large countries. For example, France has an army of hundreds of thousands and can maintain its production lines through arms sales. Even during a downturn in the arms industry, when everyone is losing money, large countries have the capital to keep their gun factories afloat by providing tax exemptions or subsidies, allowing these military enterprises to survive. Otto established the arms factory with the aim of cultivating the country's ability to manufacture weapons. Currently, besides supplying rifles and ammunition to large farms around the Mediterranean, Otto sees another role for the arms factory as cultivating its own talent and conducting weapons research and development. Otto adopted this approach not only for military factories but also for steel mills and machine manufacturing plants. Besides maintaining production, he focused on absorbing talent from other countries to build the framework, while simultaneously cultivating Greek talent to further develop domestic technologies. Otto's current advantage lies in his knowledge of the fundamental principles of future, more advanced technologies. He may not know how to specifically translate these principles into practical applications, but as long as they are entrusted to the talents of this era, and with sufficient investment in experimentation, some results will inevitably be achieved. After inquiring about the technology and management situation, Otto then inquired about the raw materials. Greece lacks high-quality coal and iron ore. Although the country produces a large amount of lignite, it is unsuitable for steel making. Under these circumstances, the steel mills established in Greece could only import high-quality iron ore and coal from overseas. Given Greece's geographical location, the most convenient countries for coal imports were Britain and Russia. Britain has abundant coal reserves and ranks among the world's top producers, consistently a major coal exporter in Europe. Welsh white coal, for example, is a world-renowned thermal coal, and many navies even use imported Welsh white coal exclusively. Ukraine, part of Russia, also possesses vast coal and iron ore reserves, with the famous Donbas coalfield containing large quantities of low-sulfur, high-carbon anthracite. To ensure a stable supply of these raw materials and simultaneously export its own products, Otto's company also established a dedicated ocean shipping company. Chapter 43 Cultural Front. In fact, Greece at this time had a significant advantage in maritime transport. Besides Otto himself building a large ocean shipping company through capital investment, Greek merchants, especially Greek shipowners, wielded considerable power along the Mediterranean and Black Sea coasts. These Greek merchants resided in Constantinople and were engaged in maritime transport for many years, gradually gaining widespread recognition. The most prominent among them were even dubbed maritime dynasties due to their reputation in the industry. Examples include the Lares Brothers Company and the Radikanishi family, both headquartered in London. During the period of Greek independence, the Ottomans severely suppressed the Greeks within their borders, causing the Greek shipping industry to lose a large share of the Mediterranean market. These Greek merchants were forced to temporarily relocate to other countries to further their businesses. However, with Greek independence becoming a certainty, and with the protection of countries like Britain, France, and Russia, the Ottomans ceased targeting Greeks domestically. Greek merchants gradually regained much of the Mediterranean market lost to the shipping industry. Through maritime trade, Greece imported various minerals, grains, cotton, and other goods from Britain, Austria, Russia, Egypt, and the United States, a much more convenient and cost-effective method than land trade. Otto's shipping companies operated along the western Mediterranean routes, primarily trading with Central and Western Europe and North America. These Greek merchants were particularly familiar with maritime trade with Russia and Egypt, possessing a deep network of connections. Vast quantities of grain, minerals, and timber were loaded onto ships from Russia, a major agricultural and mining nation, and transported across the Bosphorus Strait to Western Europe, while simultaneously transporting manufactured goods back to Russia. This maritime trade route accounted for more than half of Russia's imports and exports. This explains why, for nearly 3 centuries, every Russian Tsar, given the opportunity, launched the Russo-Turkish War and fought the Ottoman Empire for so long over Constantinople. The Ottomans, controlling the Bosphorus Strait, profited immensely simply by levying tolls on ships, making them a bitter enemy of the Russians. Now, Greece has become another trading partner for Russia. The industrial zone in the port of Piraeus alone requires tens of thousands of tons of iron ore and coal annually, not to mention other commodities. After leaving the Piraeus industrial zone, Otto visited a local primary school. Compulsory education in Greece is now very effective. To date, over 50,000 Greek children are receiving basic education. Otto has also repeatedly had these schools use examinations to select outstanding and talented students in compulsory education, especially promising students from disadvantaged families, ensuring continued support and assistance. As factories in the Piraeus industrial region began to operate, Greece's labor shortage became increasingly severe. The jobs available to illiterate workers were severely limited, and factories lacked workers with even a basic level of education. Some even boldly set their sights on the military. Since soldiers had received basic education in Bavaria and underwent technical training in the military, many jobs could be mastered with only a short adaptation period. Otto even visited teacher training colleges specifically to address this issue, as Greece suffered from a severe shortage of educators, and many schools collaborated with local churches, with missionaries serving as part-time teachers. Greek Orthodox missionaries made significant contributions to education and cultural dissemination in Greece, helping to spread Greek education and culture to the surrounding Mediterranean regions, a form of intangible expansion. In fact, during the centuries of Ottoman rule, a multicultural policy was implemented, and the Orthodox Church, headed by the Greek Ecumenical Patriarch, was responsible for assisting the Ottoman Sultan in governing Christians within the country. Orthodox Christians, especially in the Balkans, such as in Serbia, Bulgaria, and Albania, have been influenced by Greek culture and orthodoxy for centuries. Greek has thus become the most revered language within the Orthodox Church. Coupled with historical factors, Greek holds a significant place among the upper-middle-class elites in the Balkans. Many wealthy families take pride in learning Greek, and there are numerous Greek language schools in the Balkans. In this reborn life, Otto also learns much that he could never have known in his previous life, such as the origins of the Greek language and Christianity. Christianity originated in Palestine, and when it spread to the Balkans and Asia Minor under Roman rule, Greek was the most widely used language in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. Therefore, the earliest Christian Bible, the New Testament, was written in Greek. Greek left a profound imprint on the development of Christianity, and after the fragmentation of the Roman Empire, the Christian Church split into the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. The Eastern Orthodox Church advocates the use of Greek for missionary work, while the Catholic Church primarily uses Latin for religious activities. Because of this deep historical connection, many in the Eastern Orthodox Church feel a responsibility to the Greek language and even to Roman culture, or the Eastern Roman Empire. Even during Ottoman rule, Orthodox missionaries maintained a tradition of secretly running Greek schools and teaching the language. At the same time, Orthodox clergy held those who did not speak Greek in higher regard, considering them vulgar. For this reason, Greek was widely spoken among the upper and middle classes of the Balkans, and even today, the term Greek is a broad one in the eyes of the Ottomans. They referred to almost all Orthodox Christians within their territory as Greeks, a term that undoubtedly included Slavs, possibly Serbs, Bulgarians, or Armenians. If it weren't for the strength of the Russian Empire and the forceful promotion of the concept of Greater Slavs by several Tsars in the Balkans, future ethnic groups like Bulgarians and Serbs might not have been considered part of the Slavic community, or even existed at all. Otto's current promotion of Greek language and culture among the common people serves two purposes: first, to suppress or even eliminate the nascent nationalism in the Balkans, and second, to compete with the Russians for public opinion and national identity. If they didn't claim their cultural ground, others would. Otto wouldn't relinquish what was currently Greece's only advantage. Besides promoting Greek culture, behind the scenes, when the Ottoman resisted Russian pan-Slavism and national independence movements, the royal financial groups, at Otto's behest, often sabotaged the Russians. Otto's spies even resorted to unethical methods like assassination and poisoning to physically eliminate key figures. Chapter 44: Military Drills. The last stop on his inspection tour was the still under construction city of Athens. By then, the outline of the new Athens had already emerged, built entirely to the standards of a modern city. Otto's specifications included roads large enough for 8 horse-drawn carriages, along with a complete garbage collection system, public toilets, and a sewer system. The current scale of Athens, still under construction, was designed to accommodate 50,000 people, which was excessively spacious for Athens, which at the time had only a little over 10,000 residents, and had drawn considerable opposition. However, from a developmental perspective, Otto believed that Athens would soon be filled, and therefore, he even instructed the designers from the outset to consider the future expansion needs of Athens. After the inspection, Otto rested at his palace, built on a hillside in northern Athens. Otto chose a manor on the outskirts of Nafplio for his royal palace. Originally owned by a wealthy merchant, it had been simply renovated and used as a temporary residence. It paled in comparison to the current 4,500-hectare manor with its lush forests and verdant lawns, let alone the palaces of many other European royal families. Butler West had always felt that the Nafplio palace was too shabby and failed to reflect Otto's dignity as king, suggesting that he expand and renovate it. Otto brushed all this off with a promise of moving the capital to Athens in the future. Even the Athenian palace was only approved to begin construction at the end of last year. In this regard, Vestar's initiative was surprisingly strong. He devoted considerable effort to building the palace on the outskirts of Athens, considering it the most important task. The enormous scale of the palace construction plan meant that only a small portion of Otto's Athenian palace was completed so far, but its majestic outline was already faintly visible. Finally, after 3 days in Athens, Otto concluded his 3-month domestic tour and returned to Nafplio by newly opened train. On his first day back, Otto rose early and went to the Greek army camp on the outskirts of the city. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the soldiers in the barracks were awakened by the loud sound of bugles. Already accustomed to this routine, they skillfully donned their newly issued summer training uniforms and hurriedly assembled on the barracks parade ground. These soldiers were now remarkably robust, not only due to improved rations but also the intensive training they had received. The Greek infantry training regulations modernized Greek army training. They abolished most forms of corporal punishment, changed the army's organizational structure, emphasized rewards for soldiers who fought bravely, and provided guidelines for the operation and maintenance of weaponry. Most importantly, they reformed the mobile tactics at the battalion and company levels. 10 minutes later, after a brief public training, the assembled soldiers followed the routine training regulations and ran around the military camp for a morning jog of approximately 5 kilometers in length. According to instructors in the army, this is to train their feet and increase the speed of daily army movement. As usual, after finishing the run, all the soldiers were lined up neatly and sweating profusely. Now what Damon was thinking about was to disperse as early as possible, then enter the canteen. Eat 2 pieces of black bread studded with raisins, a hard-boiled egg, and finally add some cheese to satisfy his hunger. However, after today's routine run, the officer standing before them didn't dismiss them as usual. Instead, he said with a hint of deeper meaning, "High-ranking officers will be inspecting your training today. I need you to maintain your usual performance, but be extremely focused. If anything happens that damages the reputation of our guards, do you know what I might do in my anger?" "Sir, we know what to do." "Sir, please don't add any more training. I don't want to go back to the solitary confinement cell. It's no place for a human being." While offering verbal assurances, the soldiers began speculating about which important figure was visiting the camp. They recalled that His Majesty the King, who was known for his frequent inspections, seemed to be on a nationwide tour recently. However, if it was indeed His Majesty the King, a good performance might earn them special rewards, perhaps even allowing them to skip the probationary period and directly gain admission to military academy to become officers. This wasn't just empty talk, there were real-life examples. Whether specially promoted by Otto or passing the regular examinations, ordinary soldiers had the opportunity to become officers, improving their status and significantly increasing their income. Therefore, in the Greek army, ambitious soldiers were highly motivated in their training and all forms of military education. 2 hours later, the daily training in the military camp officially began. According to the training regulations, the Greek army was divided into 3 branches: infantry, cavalry, and artillery. Together, they formed the 3-horse chariot of the army, coordinating their operations and fighting together. First, they trained in various formations, followed by skirmish formations, infantry-artillery coordination, infantry-cavalry coordination, and so on. At this time, major European powers had phased out matchlock muskets, and even flintlock muskets were being replaced by more advanced percussion cap muskets, also known as striking muskets. Even in Russia, a country widely considered relatively poorly equipped among the great powers, the matchlock musket had been phased out. At that time, the only European countries still using matchlock muskets were probably the small states of Italy and Germany. Of course, according to Otto's understanding, apart from Austria-controlled northern Italy, matchlock muskets remained very popular in other Italian states. Spain, then embroiled in civil war, also had both sides heavily equipped with matchlock muskets, many of which were second-hand weapons discarded by other countries. As for the even more backward Ottoman Empire, according to Otto's intelligence, even though the Sudanese government invested heavily in military reforms, within the Ottoman army, only a small portion of the Sultan's trusted troops and border units were equipped with the most advanced weaponry. Most of the Ottoman army didn't even have widespread use of muskets. Many soldiers were forced to rely on bows, arrows, spears, and other melee weapons. The modernization of weaponry also changed the army's combat methods. For example, while line warfare was still employed in the Greek army, the importance of skirmishers was steadily increasing. This training exercise, like most others, proceeded without incident. But the soldiers failed to spot the important figure who had come to inspect. At this moment, Otto, dressed in military uniform, was observing the soldiers training through binoculars in the distance. He was quite satisfied and remarked seriously, "The soldiers are performing well as always. I believe these young men will also perform excellently in future wars, working together to defeat our enemies." Inspecting military training was one of Otto's favorite things to do. After all, in this era of great conflict, military strength was a nation's most important line of defense. So far, Otto was generally satisfied with the army's condition. Chapter 45: Medicines and Food. Otto had originally planned to appear and give a speech after the training was completely finished, but a piece of good news he had just received made him choose to leave first. The news came from the medical school. One of the several drug projects he had been funding researchers to conduct had finally yielded results. The aspirin that Otto had previously made from salicin extracted from willow bark had become the flagship product of the Royal Consortium's pharmaceutical company due to its remarkable effects in treating inflammation and reducing fever, and was widely praised by doctors and users. Aspirin sales bring Otto hundreds of thousands of pounds in profit each year, and this figure continues to increase with the opening of more markets, making the pharmaceutical company a profit margin comparable to that of luxury goods companies within the Royal Consortium. It is precisely because of the vast financial prospects of pharmaceutical companies that they have sufficient funds to invest in the research and development of new drugs. Although the drug completed this time is not Otto's most important penicillin, it is still a product with great potential. Sarftan sodium, also known as salfazin, is an arsenic-containing drug. Originally discovered by Paul Ehrlich and his colleagues after long-term experimental research, it was finally discovered in 1908 by Paul Ehrlich's laboratory, becoming the world's first drug for treating syphilis. Its precursor, arsphenamine, was actually quite common. This compound had long been widely used as an embalming agent in 17th century England, and arsphenamine seeping from ancient cemeteries is one of the most notorious pollutants in British groundwater in the 21st century. Knowing the result, Working backwards is much easier than pioneering. Otto's researchers only needed to purify and conduct continuous experiments to find the appropriate dosage. From initial animal experiments to human trials on infected individuals, the drug underwent continuous purification, testing, and analysis, ultimately resulting in a finished product with toxicity within human tolerance, achieving a therapeutic effect for syphilis. Convanamine's medicinal applications were not widespread, but Otto knew its profits would be comparable to aspirin. Previously, there was no cure for syphilis. Once convanamine's efficacy was confirmed, even with its toxicity, those suffering from the disease would be willing to spend a fortune to try it. The Royal Consortium experienced tremendous growth in recent years, establishing numerous influential partners not only in Germany but throughout Europe and even the New World. The pharmaceutical company had invested in hospitals in various countries. They would take their manufactured drugs there, advertise them in the newspapers, and soon people would flock to them for treatment. The hospital in the Kingdom of Bavaria was one of the first to open, and within just over 10 days, it had treated more than 60 patients. Except for one death, all the others had recovered. Fortunately, to avoid trouble, patients had been informed of the risks and signed contracts before receiving treatment, so the death was averted and ended peacefully. At that time, syphilis was incurable. Having a cure was a blessing. According to the pharmaceutical company's statistics, the mortality rate of this drug was about 1 in 30, a revolutionary advancement compared to traditional treatments. While the medical school team is still researching improved drugs with lower toxicity, it doesn't stop the pharmaceutical company from starting to promote and advertise them, making money from this drug. Depending on the severity of the patient's condition, the treatment price ranges from £30 to £50, while the company's manufacturing cost is less than 1/10. This price is equivalent to half a year's income for a middle-class British person, which is quite expensive, but after its reputation spread, people continued to flock to it. Seeing such good business, naturally some were envious, but with the Royal Consortium's network of connections, this was not a major problem. Due to the Mediterranean climate, Greek summers are not particularly hot, especially as autumn approaches, when they become even more pleasantly cool. Having just finished his nationwide tour and discussed and announced some policy adjustments and new initiatives with the cabinet, Otto was feeling rather lazy with some free time. At this moment, Otto was lying on Natasha's lap, listening to her read the newspaper and the news she had gathered from various places. Land prices across the United States had started high and gradually become outrageous, with the U.S. government attaching exorbitant premiums to every piece of land it sold. Even so, those who bought the land generally made a fortune within days. This was within Otto's expectations, but what he hadn't anticipated was that this land boom, which began on the east coast of the United States, seemed to be trending towards the Midwest. Fortunately, the American expulsion of Native Americans prevented this from happening. Otherwise, Otto would have had West arrange for people to buy up land in the American West ahead of time. According to Otto's future plans, this prime agricultural land in America would yield multiple harvests during the various economic crises of the coming decades. Another piece of news is this year's wheat price. As a bumper wheat harvest is foreseeable in Britain and Austria, the British have begun dumping wheat everywhere, causing international wheat prices to plummet. Even Austria and Hungary, which also had bumper harvests, are now facing a gloomy situation. This led many landowners to switch to other crops to make up for their losses, while Greece seized the opportunity to buy wheat in large quantities, putting its national food reserve plan on the agenda. This food problem also led to a further rise in the power of the monarchical faction, which had previously held the upper hand in Hungary. The later establishment of the Kingdom of Hungary and the well-known bloated nature of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, along with the persistent problems of the dual empire, remained a concern for Austria. Otto, while learning from these experiences, also paid close attention to the situations in Austria and Hungary. Within Hungary, there was always a division between the monarchical and imperial factions, both acting in their own self-interest. The imperialists, who supported Austrian rule in Hungary, were mostly emerging Hungarian nobles and capitalists, as well as long-time residents of Vienna who identified with Austrian culture. They believed that Hungary's separation from Austria would be tantamount to self-destruction, and the best way to protect their interests was through complete integration of Austria and Hungary, allowing Hungary to play a greater role in the empire. The royalists, on the other hand, believed that the Austrians had taken their wealth and kingdom, and that it was only right for power to remain in Hungary's hands. They should not serve Austria. These individuals even demanded that the Habsburgs repay their debts to Hungary. A large portion of these were traditional landed nobles who controlled taxation, the judiciary, and even organized armies within their own territories. These aristocratic families opposed Austria primarily because they were unwilling to relinquish power and even intended to use independence as leverage to gain more benefits. Meanwhile, some aristocrats, driven to extreme poverty, desperately sought to change their circumstances through violence and reverse their current impoverished state, thus strongly supporting Hungary's direct independence. Otto believed that Austria's best approach to the complex ethnic issues within its borders was to implement universal education and gradually assimilate the common people. This way, even if the upper aristocracy wanted to rebel, Austria's strength would be sufficient to suppress them. Given the right opportunity and a thorough purge, it was entirely possible to avoid the unfortunate fate of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in history. Unfortunately, the current Austrian government lacks the capacity or the funds, and no one in this era truly understands the weakness of a dual empire. Austria can only continue down the established path. Chapter 46 Royal Dinner and Engagement Candidates. On Christmas Day 1834, Otto, at the behest of Queen Therese, chose to return to the Munich royal palace. Ludwig I hosted a court banquet at the palace, which was highly valued by government officials, military and political figures, and Bavarian nobles. Everyone who could attend came. Otto estimated that the number of guests would exceed 4 figures, and most of the unused rooms in the palace were cleaned out that day. During the banquet, the Bavarian Prime Minister requested Otto that more Bavarians be brought to Greece for work. At this time, Bavaria was notoriously barren in the German region. Despite being an agricultural country, it couldn't even achieve self-sufficiency and had to import grain annually. It wasn't until Otto had made some achievements in managing his own territory a few years ago that the Bavarian royal steward followed suit and began to promote a large-scale farm model within the royal territory, which also attracted some nobles who were close to the royal family. Although less efficient than Otto's territories, these changes significantly reduced Bavaria's food shortage. Unfortunately, their primary motivation was self-interest, and they were unwilling to share any of the benefits with their subjects. Consequently, the living conditions of their own people were far worse than in Otto's territories, and they could not reverse the hardship faced by the Bavarian lower classes. Bavarians have a long tradition of seeking work elsewhere and even emigrating. Previously, Austria was their first choice due to its size and abundance of opportunities. However, with Otto becoming king of Greece, the country's large-scale labor recruitment for development provided these people with another option. Ludwig I wasn't particularly interested in such matters, or rather, this had always been the case in Bavaria, and he had grown accustomed to it. However, at the Prime Minister's request, Ludwig I discussed the matter with Otto. This was a good thing, and Otto readily agreed. Compared to the tedious domestic affairs, Ludwig I's hobbies and energy were more focused on the art, as evidenced by the 36 beauties in the Nymphenburg Palace's gallery. Seeing Otto frequently sending various luxury goods and cosmetics to Queen Therese, the womanizing Ludwig I followed suit, acquiring the latest luxury items from Venus's secret in recent years to please his many lovers. Even the Crown Prince of Bavaria, Otto's older brother, shared a similar habit with Ludwig I, accumulating considerable debt in Venus's secret account. It's easy to guess where that money went. Seeing the behavior of these two, Otto completely abandoned his last hope that Greece and Bavaria could develop together, cooperate, and become two major European powers jointly dominating European affairs. The magnificent and spacious royal hall of the Munich residence, with its noble and luxurious interior design, served as the main room for this banquet. Ludwig I specially arranged for Otto to sit to his lower right, while Otto's older brother, the future Maximian II, sat to his lower left. The remaining seats were filled with important nobles and cabinet officials. The long tables were laden with gilded platters adorned with flowers, fruit, and desserts. Silver platters held the main courses and soups, each course accompanied by its own wine and glass. The atmosphere was harmonious, with everyone chatting and laughing. After the banquet, everyone took their leave, leaving only a group of royal family members. At this point, Queen Teresa spoke to Otto about the most important thing in her mind. I have chosen a marriage partner for you. A marriage partner? When was that decided? Otto asked, somewhat surprised. Just recently. If you hadn't been so indifferent, it wouldn't have dragged on for so long. If it weren't for your attitude towards Natasha, I would have thought you had another interest. Queen Teresa's tone carried a hint of dissatisfaction. Initially, I proposed to Princess Victoria of England, but she rejected me. Wait a minute, your mother wants me to be engaged to Victoria? Otto was even more surprised now. I noticed you seemed quite interested in that girl before, and she's suitable in many ways, but you haven't been very proactive, so naturally it's my turn to worry about it. At the time, I just thought she was a little too young. Since she rejected me, I let it go. Otto naturally couldn't say that he had acted somewhat strangely because she was the future famous Queen Victoria. Of course, I don't want to be rejected a second time, even if it's possible, Queen Teresa continued. Therefore, I've chosen another candidate, the daughter of Nicholas I, who has already agreed. Good heavens, if I can't be the son-in-law of the British Empire, I'll be the son-in-law of the Russian Empire? My expectations as a mother are certainly not low, Otto muttered to himself, patiently listening to Queen Teresa's explanation of the other woman's situation. Alexandra Nikolaevna was the fourth child and youngest daughter of the current Nicholas I and Empress Alexandra Feodorovna. Otto had no memory of her from his previous life, but according to Queen Teresa, Nicholas I doted on his little daughter, who was very intelligent and lively, and had a natural talent for singing. What left Otto somewhat speechless was that his fiancée was born in 1825 and was not even 10 years old yet. He wondered what Nicholas I was thinking when he agreed to this marriage. So next year, you must go to St. Petersburg to have the engagement ceremony there. Do you understand? Queen Teresa concluded. But she's not even 10 years old. Otto hesitated. What's the big deal? It's not like you're getting married right now. Just arrange the engagement first, and then you can get married after she comes of age, Queen Teresa said nonchalantly. Actually, a significant age gap between spouses isn't uncommon in European royal families. Since there are only so many princes and princesses of marriageable age, many choose to postpone marriage if they were unwilling to settle, waiting for a suitable partner. After all, these princes don't lack lovers. She vaguely remembered that her original wife was the eldest daughter of the Grand Duke of Oldenburg, but now it seems the butterfly effect has changed things. Queen Teresa didn't know how she persuaded Nicholas I to arrange the engagement so early. What did Nicholas I see in her? Was it to woo Greece and make it lean towards Russia? Perhaps it was a consequence of being king for so long, but Otto's initial considerations were primarily political. His position was most worthy of attention as the king of Greece, but was Greece truly worth Nicholas I's considerable effort? However, since an agreement had been reached, Otto, as the person directly involved, had no choice but to comply. Offending the Tsar could easily escalate into a diplomatic incident. Chapter 47 Industrial Adjustment. It wasn't until 1835 that Otto left Munich to return to Greece. Before leaving, he wrote a letter to Russia informing Nicholas I that he would be visiting St. Petersburg in the summer of 1835. At the end of last year, at a cabinet meeting, Greek fiscal revenue surpassed the 100 million drachmas mark, reaching 128.37 million drachmas, an increase of nearly 50%. This increase in fiscal revenue is partly due to the extensive development of Greek land and the rapid growth of the textile industry. Over the past year, the royal treasury has invested heavily in the textile industry. Of the 670 state-of-the-art steam looms added to Greece last year, 500 were purchased from Britain or manufactured in the royal treasury's own machinery factories. Simultaneously, Greece signed a cotton import agreement with Egypt, allowing the Greek textile industry to obtain raw materials at relatively favorable prices, enhancing its competitiveness. The reduced costs have enabled Greek textile products to capture a significant market share in the Mediterranean region, generating substantial profits and boosting government revenue. Even the cabinet itself was surprised by the increased taxes, initially unsure how to allocate such a large sum of new income. Some suggested that since this year's fiscal surplus is so much larger than initially projected, the final tranche of bonds to be issued this year should be reduced to lessen the future financial burden. The transport minister indicated that investment in roads could be increased, while the agriculture minister suggested using the funds for irrigation projects. Following Otto's inspection tour, numerous irrigation projects have been initiated across Greece, with everyone aiming to secure increased budgets. Some even suggested providing substantial bonuses to government employees. Ultimately, Otto made the final decision. The number of bonds issued remained unchanged. The planned railway to Larissa in Thessalia region was extended to the Ottoman border, and a canal project and 2 reservoir construction plans proposed by the Ministry of Agriculture were approved. As for bonuses for government staff, the cabinet itself rejected them outright. Seeing this, Otto generously provided a batch of high-quality flour, sausages, biscuits, beef jerky, and sugar from his own food processing plant, to be distributed to various departments based on government performance. These food items were barely needed by high-ranking government officials, but they were still quite valuable to ordinary staff. These lowly government employees, who did the most tedious work, received these allowances from Otto to make their New Year's holiday more relaxed and enjoyable. As king, he could be generous to the lower levels of government, but for the prime minister, it was the opposite. Only Otto, the king, could be the good guy, winning people's hearts, while the prime minister had to be the bad guy, urging the government to work harder and cutting expenses. At this time, Otto's agricultural company cultivated wheat, barley, sugar beets, potatoes, flax, and other crops, and also raised a considerable number of cattle and sheep. The fishing and aquaculture industries of his company were also developing rapidly, with abundant seafood products. In this situation, engaging in complementary processing maximizes profits, while achieving complete self-sufficiency in clothing, food, housing, and transportation, truly fulfilling the ultimate pursuit of feudal landlords. Otto himself has become a combination of super-aristocrat and monopolistic capitalist, representing the mainstream of contemporary society. He himself doesn't know how many people work for him in companies under the royal conglomerate, both within and outside Greece. He can only roughly estimate a number, which likely exceeds the current population of Greece, truly 1 million employees whose livelihoods depend on him. Recently, Otto plans to implement a new reward and punishment system, introducing incentive programs to motivate employees. For example, if average monthly output increases or overall quality improves, workers can receive flour or other food rewards. This measure was cost-effective, as the food was all self-produced, making its cost significantly lower than market prices. After all, the price of flour increases by at least several times from factory to retail. Distributing it to the workers meant they had the corresponding needs, reducing their living expenses, similar to directly giving bonuses, while also saving Otto money. The workers liked this reward, choosing flour more often than other items because it offered the best value. Otto discovered that West had played a trick. While he was generous when calculating the bonuses for the workers, making it relatively easy to meet the requirements, West shamelessly replaced the bonuses with small packets when distributing them. Because the rewards and punishments weren't clearly stated when they were announced, the workers didn't say much. To cater to different customer needs, the food processing plant developed different sizes of packaging for its flour, the largest being a 50-kilogram bag, followed by 20 kilograms medium bags and 10 kilograms small bags. And, just like in later times, on average, the smaller the package, the higher the unit price. One can only say that one shouldn't underestimate the people of this era, especially not the capitalists. Perhaps because workers in this era were generally quite hard-working, it was already a favor if capitalists didn't deduct wages. It was rare for them to be willing to give out bonuses. Therefore, the workers were all beaming with joy when receiving the bonuses. Otto has recently been busy with a royal consortium, primarily focusing on further separating the finances of its various subsidiaries to prevent financial chaos and bad accounts. Even purchases between the group's companies must be settled at market prices, rather than being directly transferred with headquarters approval as before. Simultaneously, internal financial transactions within each company are required to go through the Greek Crown Bank. Other transactions, unless specifically requested by a partner, must also prioritize using the Crown Bank's accounts. To avoid attracting attention, many companies under the Royal Consortium operate under numerous shell companies. For example, the agricultural company alone has 7 or 8 different shell companies in the Balkans, with dozens of regional heads. The food processing company also had 5 or 6 brands, using different packaging and targeting different consumer groups and regions, selling the same flour at different prices. As the business grew, Otto found himself going further and further down the path of a ruthless businessman. Tactics he had heard about in his past life and previously complained about were now being used in elaborate and sophisticated ways. While enriching Otto's pockets, the Royal Consortium's various businesses spread across major cities in Europe and North America, expanding Otto's influence and intelligence-gathering reach. In the past year, the profits of Otto's businesses more than doubled, but at the end of the year, He only had less than 80,000 British pounds in readily available cash. Otto mainly discovered that there were simply too many profitable industries, and he couldn't resist continuously investing. In his plan, these industries overlap and could complement each other. In modern terms, this meant perfecting the industrial chain, controlling everything from upstream raw material supply to downstream product sales. Chapter 48 Arrival in St. Petersburg. In February 1835, a momentous event occurred in Europe. Francis II, the last emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and the founder of the Austrian Empire, passed away. Due to the relationship between the Bavarian royal family and the Habsburgs, Otto also attended the funeral. As a man with a modern soul, Otto struggled to understand the feelings of ordinary people towards the emperor at that time. He found the entire country immersed in grief. Without any orders, even the busiest streets of Austria fell silent. Otto was astonished, but also gained a deeper understanding of this era. The death of Francis II signified the end of an era and the inevitable beginning of Austria's decline. The newly enthroned Ferdinand suffered from intellectual disabilities, making it difficult to believe he could control the vast empire. This would undoubtedly have a huge impact on everything in the Austrian Empire, plunging Austria into internal chaos. However, Otto saw it as also beneficial to Greece. The internal turmoil would slow Austrian infiltration into the Balkans, giving Greece more opportunities. After attending the funeral, Otto met in Vienna with Friedrich List, an economist he had specially invited from the United States. List was a skeptic and critic of classical economics and a pioneer of the German historical school. List had previously been dedicated to promoting economic unification in Germany, and his economic theories served the interests of the state and society, contradicting the prevailing liberal economics of Adam Smith. This is precisely why, although he promoted the establishment of the German customs union, he was not welcomed by the mainstream bourgeoisie, and the nobles in the German regions were not interested in his theories. Ultimately, he had to leave Germany and live in America. Otto only remembered him after accidentally seeing details about the formation of the German customs union in an intelligence report. Lister believed that the state should play an important role in economic life, and that the state should lead industrialization and protect trade. In Otto's view, Lister's economic theories were highly compatible with the economic policies currently being implemented in Greece. Therefore, he had the Royal Financial Group's personnel in North America extend an invitation to Lister, wanting him to serve as his economic advisor. List, who was being ostracized in Germany at the time, had already settled down in the United States and was preparing to invest in a mine. However, because of Otto's sincerity, mainly due to the very good treatment he promised, he finally decided to meet with Otto. After some discussions, List found that Otto's policies for governing Greece coincided with his economic theories in many ways, and ultimately accepted Otto's invitation to serve as his economic advisor. Afterwards, List and Otto returned to Greece, where they spent 3 months visiting various parts of the country, reviewing relevant Greek documents, and then proposed a set of improvement plans for the current Greek policies. After more than a month of discussion in the cabinet, with Otto's support, most of the policies in this plan were implemented. But Otto didn't have time to see what changes this plan would bring to Greece before he left Nafplio because of an invitation from St. Petersburg. In his previous life, Otto had gone on many blind dates. Because he had 2 brothers and his parents had ordinary jobs. Their financial situation was not good. A house, a car, and money were all serious problems. His parents could only provide limited help. After breaking up with his college girlfriend after graduation, Otto dated several other women, but all relationships ended quickly. He finally made it in middle age, saved enough money for a down payment on a house, got married, and had children. Just when he was worrying about his children's future high school education, he encountered something like being reborn. Reborn, Otto was practically born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He didn't even know how many houses and cars he owned. He could easily switch between them whenever he wanted, and no one brought it up anymore. This time, Otto didn't crave love. When choosing a marriage partner, his primary consideration was status, followed by politics. In Otto's mind, it had become a business transaction, finding a suitable partner, negotiating terms, and of course, presenting a carefully crafted image to maximize his own interests. Whether the marriage would be happy depended on the compatibility of both partners and their willingness to nurture it. On July 5, 1835, Otto accepted an invitation from Nicholas I to make a state visit to St. Petersburg. Otto harbored mixed feelings about the opportunity to marry into the Tsar's family. While Russia at that time ranked lower among the major powers in politics, economics, and technology, its sheer size made it a force to be reckoned with. Becoming the Tsar's son-in-law would at least grant Greece diplomatic advantages through the prestige of the powerful. Furthermore, the European aristocracy, as a whole, still held a degree of prejudice against Slavic barbarism. For Greece, this marriage, while beneficial, also had its drawbacks. Fortunately, relations between European nations were complex, and the influence of the relationship between two royal families on bilateral relations was not absolute. More importantly, it depended on the interests of each nation. Even when two countries are locked in a life-or-death struggle at war, it doesn't prevent members of their royal families from hunting and drinking together. The pros and cons of this marriage will depend on Otto's future diplomatic maneuvering. It must be said that St. Petersburg is quite cool in the summer, and Otto specifically chose to visit during the summer. Otherwise, the cold winter weather would be unbearable. In his previous life, Otto had traveled to Harbin on business, arriving in winter. Even dressed warmly and wearing a cotton hat, the biting cold made his cheeks feel like they weren't even his own. It's said that Russian winters are even colder, which makes Otto admire the resilience of the Russian people. St. Petersburg only has 2 seasons, 4 months of summer and 8 months of winter. Living in such a harsh environment for a long time has forged the resilience of the Russian people. While the nickname Fighting Nation is somewhat ironic, it aptly reflects the character of this people. Even 2 centuries later, facing various threats, Russia remained steadfast. Upon Otto's arrival in St. Petersburg, Russia held a grand welcoming ceremony. Nicholas I and his wife personally received him, making Otto feel highly valued. Of course, according to the principle of reciprocity in diplomatic relations, it was normal for Nicholas I to receive Otto, who was, after all, a king. The weather in St. Petersburg in July was pleasant. Otto arrived in the afternoon, and to welcome him, Nicholas I arranged a grand court ball. The attendees of the court ball were all Russian nobles. Many grand dukes gathered together, drinking and chatting. Russians enjoy drinking, though the nobles of that era didn't drink vodka. That was for ordinary people. Now, champagne is the popular drink among Russian nobles. At the ball, Otto witnessed firsthand the Russians' drinking prowess. He even heard of a Grand Duke's great achievements, drinking over 100 bottles of champagne at a single party. Whether this was true or an exaggeration, Otto recalled a little joke about Russians and Chinese drinking at a table. Russians have a drinking custom of finishing their glasses as a sign of friendliness, while Chinese people consider it impolite to see guests with empty glasses. The Russian and the Chinese sat down at the table. Seeing their glasses were full, the Russian picked up his glass and downed it in one gulp. The Chinese, seeing this, immediately refilled his glass, and the Russian again drank it down. So the Russian kept drinking, and the Chinese kept refilling his glass, until the Russian passed out. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49. The British have never been reliable. Making friends with Russians is quite comfortable. At least most Russians have a very forthright and generous nature. Knowing that Otto had come to get engaged, Nicholas I and most of the Russian nobles were very friendly. Otto's only regret was not seeing his fiancée at the ball, but considering she was just a 10-year-old girl, he didn't mind too much. The next day, Nicholas I invited Otto to go hunting at a manor outside St. Petersburg. Hunting was a tradition passed down from the Middle Ages among European nobles, and a stage to display their power and privilege. Even now, hunting remains a favorite activity for many noble families. For the hunt, Otto brought his own handcrafted double-barreled hunting rifle. The stock, made of lacquered reddish-brown walnut, was exceptionally smooth to the touch. The barrels were an ink black, and the saddle was decorated with intricate, bright silver patterns. Donning his boots and hunting attire, he arrived at the designated courtyard, where he heard a cacophony of barking dogs. 30 colorful hunting dogs, adorned with various patterns, had gathered, held in place by a male servant in hunting gear. Upon seeing Otto, the dogs barked even louder, continuing until Nicholas I arrived. They all wagged their tails vigorously and rushed towards him. After greeting Otto, Nicholas I approached the hounds and stroked their heads one by one. Otto then joined in, exchanging greetings and chatting with Nicholas I. It was always good to make a good impression, no matter what. Unbeknownst to him, Nicholas I had just reviewed his latest intelligence report before coming. This report included countless trivial details from Otto's childhood to adulthood, enough to fill a book. Nicholas I had already reviewed most of the previous materials. What he saw yesterday was merely the latest intelligence, including Otto's appointment of Liszt as his economic advisor and the adoption of many of his suggestions. The source of this information is self-evident. The Russian Empire's intelligence organization is not incompetent, and most of this information was not classified. Through this information, Nicholas I gained a very good understanding of Otto. After reviewing Otto's intelligence, Nicholas I highly valued Otto's background and abilities. Among his peers, Otto was undoubtedly a top-tier young talent. His business acumen and governing abilities were first-rate, and he possessed skillful political maneuvering and decisiveness when necessary. Otto's immediate execution of so many powerful figures upon arriving in Greece might seem like youthful impulsiveness, but his subsequent handling of the situation was excellent, successfully stabilizing the country. He even gained the support of the vast majority of Greeks in a very short time, which is extraordinary. This decisiveness, ruthlessness, and skill in manipulating people and public opinion are not like those of a young man, rather, they resemble those of a mature and cunning old fox. At the same time, Otto is relatively restrained in his relationships with women. To date, only one close tutor has become his attendant, and he has had some affairs with women of high status in France and England. Compared to the generally outrageous behavior of the nobility today, Otto can be considered remarkably chaste, unlike his father, Ludwig I. For this reason, after careful consideration, Nicholas I agreed to Queen Teresa's request for a marriage alliance. However, influencing Greece through marriage, supporting Russia's policies in the Balkans, and helping Russia dismantle the Ottoman Empire were not his sole objectives. Having been Tsar for many years, Nicholas I understood that marriage alliances were often more of a gilded ornament, and unreliable when national interests clashed. Of course, knowing through documents was not as good as seeing it in person, so Nicholas I dismissed his servants and steered the conversation, quickly bringing up the topic of the Balkan situation. The Ottoman Empire is rotten, and the Sudanese government is like a giant on its deathbed, moving forward by inertia, but it will fall sooner or later, Nicholas I said bluntly. If it weren't for the British, the valiant Russian army would surely have torn the Ottoman Empire to shreds. Indeed, the glory of the Ottomans has faded with time, and it was because they saw this opportunity that the Greek people fought for independence, Otto said cautiously. Of course, Russia also provided a great deal of assistance in the process of Greek independence. But now Greece seems to have a closer relationship with the British? Nicholas I asked, staring at Otto. Looking around, Otto realized that besides himself and Nicholas I, there was no one else. He then mustered a little courage and said with a hint of helplessness, Greece has a long coastline, and maritime security is extremely important to Greece. Greece is too far from God, but the British fleet is right before our eyes. After all, it's perfectly normal for politicians to go back on their word. Following the crowd is just basic practice. Criticizing the British in Russia is perfectly normal. Ha ha ha, it seems you are a wise king, Nicholas I reminded him. But the British have never been reliable. Otto shook his head, remaining silent. He knew, of course, that the British were known for their inhumanity, and were always unreliable. Allies are essentially used for exploitation. Even when allying with France, they didn't forget to dig traps for their ally. At the beginning of World War I, they didn't forget to exploit France, dragging their feet on mobilization, wanting to weaken both France and Germany first. Only when they saw France was about to collapse did they panic and truly begin to exert their power. After the Americans replaced the British as the world superpower, their treatment of allies basically followed a British tradition, even intensifying it. One can only say the two countries are cut from the same cloth. In contrast, post-World War II Russia was genuinely generous to its allies, but unfortunately, it lacked the American ability to deceive and trap them. However, Greece currently has no other choice, so it has said nothing. Seeing that Otto was unwilling to continue the conversation, Nicholas I did not pursue the topic further. In his view, the stakes had been planted, and thoroughly winning over Greece to serve Russia's strategy was not a matter of a day or two. Opportunities would always be found in the future. Nicholas I then pointed to the hunting dogs beside him and said, "These hunting dogs are all carefully trained by me. You can choose a few to accompany you when we go hunting." Did he try to persuade me to side with Russia any further? Otto pondered Nicholas I's thoughts, but said aloud, "Why don't you recommend some? After all, No one knows them better than you. The two quickly turned the conversation to the hunt, and soon other people arrived, and the hunt began. Ha ha ha, it seems Otto, your marksmanship still needs some practice, laughed a young Russian Grand Duke named Darevsky, urging his hunting dogs to retrieve the prey. Otto, staring at the bullet hole in a tree, measured the distance between the tree and the hare, confirming his marksmanship was as precise as ever, and declared confidently, "What do you know? I just couldn't bear to see a life lost." "If your marksmanship isn't good enough," Grand Duke Dalevsky said smugly, "I can introduce you to my marksmanship teacher." Shaking his head, Otto urged his horse forward, intending to change the hunting direction. Chapter 50 Nicholas I and the Railway. Following his conversation with Nicholas I, Otto maintained a policy of avoiding state affairs during his time in St. Petersburg, rarely expressing his own opinions. Even when participating in discussions, he only offered ambiguity, never revealing his political leanings. At his engagement ceremony, Otto finally met his fiancée, a very lively and adorable little girl. No wonder she was so beloved by Nicholas I and his wife. Otto currently only saw her as a child, but from a developmental perspective, she had great potential. At a banquet, while discussing railways with Nicholas I, Otto shared some information he knew. By this time, Britain had built over 1,000 kilometers of railway, France nearly 300 kilometers, and the United States had even built 400 kilometers in the past year. Nicholas I then told him about a letter written to him by an Austrian engineer named Franz Gerstner. This Austrian engineer was extremely passionate about railways, and in the letter he described the grand plan, to build a railway connecting St. Petersburg and Kazan to strengthen the Tsar's control over western Siberia. This is truly an incredible plan, Otto thought. He knew that Russia would build a railway directly to the east in the future, but he hadn't expected that someone would propose building such a railway to the Tsar at this time. Could this be the precursor to the Russian Siberian Railway? However, with the current level of technology, building such a railway would be quite difficult. "Yes, I think this is a revelation from God." Nicholas I seemed excited, clearly approving of the idea. "And I think this one railway isn't enough, the entire great Slavic Empire should be connected by rail. From Constantinople to St. Petersburg, through Kazan to Yakutsk, a city in the Russian Far East, and finally to Alaska. This railway will be a gift from God to the Russian Empire." "That is indeed a magnificent plan," Otto added. "Greece can then connect its existing railway with this planned one, which will also promote exchanges between the two countries." Despite this, Otto didn't believe Nicholas I's idea could be realized. Constantinople was still the capital of the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire hadn't conquered it in the next 200 years. "You're right," Nicholas I said. "I can build other places first, and after I conquer the Ottomans, I can connect Constantinople with railways. Then, naturally, I can also connect to the railway lines in Greece." Nicholas I was clearly very interested in this plan, and to realize this ideal, he established a railway construction committee. However, his idea met with fierce opposition from his ministers. The Russian Empire's nobility disagreed with his opinions and openly opposed building any railways within the country. These nobles were mostly acting in their own self-interest, a fact Nicholas I could easily discern. They worried that the completion of the railway would expand the Tsar's influence and harm their local interests. Therefore, Nicholas I largely disregarded their objections. However, the reasons for the opposition from Count Konklin, the finance minister, were something he could not ignore. In a report to the Tsar, the finance minister stated that the Ministry of Finance had no surplus of rubles to allocate to railway construction. Politically, the Russian Empire was deeply feudal, with powerful local nobles. Although the Tsar was supreme, he faced significant resistance when trying to accomplish his goals. At the same time, Russia lags far behind in industry. While exporting grain, it also imports large quantities of processed grain products. This is not a joke, it is the reality of Russia in this era. Even Otto's grain processing plant in Austria exports a significant portion of its products to Russia. The Russian Empire is essentially still a feudal agrarian country, not yet an industrialized nation. Its strength relies more on its sheer size. The financial situation of a feudal agrarian country is easily imaginable, especially since a modern military is a money-guzzling beast. An agrarian country that can easily support 400,000 to 500,000 feudal troops would find it difficult to maintain even 100,000 modern troops. Historically, after the Russo-Turkish War a few years earlier, Russia did not launch another war against the Ottoman Empire until 1853. Besides the unfavorable international situation, financial difficulties were one of the most important reasons. In modern history, the Tsarist government was notorious in Europe for being a debt defaulter, having repeatedly announced it would not repay its debts, resulting in a very low reputation. Capitalists were not fools. After being defaulted on several times, even with Russia repeatedly raising interest rates, they were unwilling to take the risk, making it increasingly difficult for Russia to raise funds. In the early stages of World War I, Russia's ability to be courted by Britain and France and withdraw from the Three Emperors League was largely due to France's efforts, aside from conflicts with the German Junker aristocracy over food supplies. To win over Russia, the French financial sector continuously provided loans, even knowing the investments were unprofitable, and invested in various factories, leading to Russia's increasing dependence on French capital. As a newly emerging nation, Germany, facing opposition from its own Junker aristocracy and lacking sufficient funds, was forced to watch as France continued to court Russia. Furthermore, Germany's tendency to side with Austria in conflicts between Austria and Russia gradually drove the two countries further apart. Ultimately, the German emperor's impulsive actions became the final straw, turning Russia into an enemy of Germany during World War I. Faced with financial difficulties, Nicholas I was at a loss. At this time, Russian experts stepped forward to support the forces opposing the railway plan. They argued that the current trains could not carry enough cargo, less than 300 horses, while the Russian Empire had 5 million mules, more than enough to handle any situation. They then raised further difficulties, stating that Russia lacked high-quality coal, necessitating massive deforestation to power the trains, which would leave Russian civilians without firewood. Simultaneously, Russia's pig iron production was severely insufficient. Constructing such a long railway would require importing large quantities of pig iron, plunging Russia's metallurgical industry into a period of decline. Finally, Prince Lyuby, one of Nicholas I's most trusted advisors, proposed a conspiracy, suggesting it might be an Austrian plot. He argued that railway construction would significantly deplete Russia's national strength, giving Austria an advantage in the partition of the Ottoman Empire. These practical difficulties forced Nicholas I to temporarily abandon the railway project, but he continued to inquire about various issues related to its construction from Otto. This made Otto realize that Nicholas I hadn't completely given up, but was merely putting the plan on hold due to practical problems. Otto didn't hide anything, telling Nicholas I everything he knew about the advantages and disadvantages of the railway. He refuted the so-called experts' claims that mules and horses were sufficient, emphasizing only that building a railway would require a massive amount of money. He wasn't worried that Nicholas I would achieve his grand ideals in the short term, even within Russia. The country's deep-seated financial problems had plagued successive Tsars, local nobles posed a strong obstacle, and Russia's unfavorable climate made natural conditions extremely unfavorable, further increasing the difficulty and cost of building a railway. These factors combined have led to the slow and difficult progress of Russia's railways. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.